Commissioner Phillips?
Here.
And Commissioner Bierk?
Here.
And for the record, Commissioner Burrows and Commissioner Overall are going to be absent.
Good. Well, it's unfortunate today. Commissioner Burrows, I believe her husband has a serious surgery today, so our best wishes go out for her, and also Mr. Overall, who I know is listening to us today, but has his own medical issue today. But so we're going to try to move through our agenda as quickly as we can today. I'll just let you know we're going to attempt to get everything done as best we can, because we do have another constraint this afternoon, so we'll lose our quorum. So with that said, let's if you see us double timing, that's the reason today.
Mr. Chair, just a quick status on your agenda. We do have a continuance request on the Clearwire matter, which is item number 1, which should help us try to get through this agenda by 12:30. Items 2, 3, 4, and 5 are all permit items. They're ready to proceed today, and we can very much shorten our staff presentations to try and accommodate them all. Item number 6 is the process improvement workshop. I think it's very simple. I already talked to the chair this morning, and if we can spend a few minutes at the end of the agenda, either with or without Commissioner Phillips, I think it's worthwhile, because I think it is quite simple.
Right. Since there's no motion, we can still do that. So
Yes.
that would be good.
Yes.
So hopefully we can get through all of these items.
Right.
I may want to reorder the agenda. We'll take a look as we move through here.
Okay.
So do you want to briefly take us through the agenda status report?
Yes, well, that was the agenda status
Oh,
report.
that was
I'll go
it.
through the
That was it.
projection-
Okay.
I'll go
Excuse
through
me,
the
projection report.
So your next meeting is scheduled for March 19th, and you do have a number of items on that day. We do have a CEQA training scheduled with the County Planning Commission on March 5th. It's a 2-hour item, and it was something that I was hoping that the Montecito Planning Commission might want to attend or at least watch. We can provide you with DVDs, or if your commission would prefer, we can ask County Council to provide your own training, but it would be much more efficient if you wanted to either join the County Planning Commission or simply watch a DVD. So I guess I'm looking for a little
Did-
bit of
did
direction
you, was
there.
that a Tuesday, did you say?
It's a Wednesday.
It's a
It's March
Wednesday.
5th.
Okay. All right. I
So-
don't believe
so-
I have any conflicts for that
Okay.
particular
We'll
time.
let you know what time of the day it'll be on the agenda.
Okay.
Is there a preference with your commission, whether it be first thing in the morning or
Generally,
at the end of the day?
I generally prefer the mornings, but
Yeah, no, that would be fine with me.
Okay. We'll try and schedule that first then on March 5th. So it'll come up pretty soon after 9 o'clock, and we'll be
great.
done before
That-
noon.
That'd probably be the easiest.
Is it inconvenient to have a DVD prepared?
No, of course not. We can do that.
I may choose that.
Okay. So that's your March. April 16th, we have virtually nothing scheduled, just a process improvement item. And then May 21st, we have no items scheduled yet. I wanted to point out that we do have a conflict for your hearing in June, I think. And the conflict surrounds the Miramar project, and we were targeting Miramar coming to your planning commission in June. However, at your June hearing, both Rick Caruso, the principal for Miramar, and me are not going to be here. And so we were hoping to schedule a special hearing with your commission on June 10th, which is a Tuesday. It's in the middle of budget week, and the board meets on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, so we should be able to accommodate Tuesday and be able to broadcast that hearing. So if commissioners could check their calendars, and we can talk about it at your next meeting if you're not prepared to do so today.
So instead of June 18th, we're proposing that the June 18th hearing go away and we just move it to the Tuesday, June 10th. Is that accurate, or would it be both of them?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Gottstinker, I think at the moment I'd like you to just consider adding a hearing. We may
Okay.
drop June 18th depending on
Right.
volume of permits, but right now I'd like to just schedule the 10th.
So this will literally
that's
be just
possible.
a special one just for the Miramar, and we'll leave the other
Right.
one on the agenda and
I
see
think
how
we
things
will
are
need the
going.
entire hearing date for the Miramar, so.
Okay.
And then we'll see if we have other items.
I think we
for
probably
the
will as
18th.
well. That would be my assumption.
Mr. Chair, we had talked about the Miramar in May. That's now June, and this will be the next opportunity with Miramar, June 10th.
That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, that's all I had to report
Good.
on the projection report.
Wonderful. Thank you. Director Baker.
I'll just take about a half hour to review things.
Okay, well, that's,
Mr. Chair,
if you
members of the
need a half
commission.
hour,
No, just one brief thing. I mean, we had a county planning commission retreat a week ago last Friday, and I thought it went very well. And so, I mean, in terms of some permit processes and further refining things in terms of maps and stuff like that, in terms of staff reports, that I think could have some real value to your planning commission as well. So, other than that, nothing else to report.
Thank you very much. Now is the time for public comment, and if there's anyone that wishes to address us on an item that's not on the agenda, now would be the time. And I see John Thorndike, you've submitted a slip
Good morning, Chair.
related to zoning
I'm
ag.
John Thorndike of 1300 Tor Canyon Road, and I have, I see that you have something that'll give you a fast start on what I have to talk about. Your number 2, one-page deal here. On 1, it says the purpose and intent of Ag 1.5 agricultural zoning in the coastal zone, T coastal zone, is to designate, quote, to designate and protect lands appropriate for long-term agricultural use. And then it says within or adjacent to urbanized areas, and to preserve prime agricultural soils, okay? Now, what I'd like to talk about is your number 3 says a comparison with other lots in the Montecito Avocado Ranch demonstrates that no more than 1 acre was used for residential purposes on the other lots that are a part of same ranch. Now, I'd appreciate some information sometime on what that means. Also, I'd like to know the meaning of coastal zone. I think it means like 2 to 5 miles inland, depending on whether there's cliffs or not. I really don't know the answer to that. And to designate and protect lands appropriate for long-term agricultural use within or adjacent to urbanized areas. That word adjacent is a very of interest to me. Does it mean abutting, or does it mean more than that? And with that, I thank you. I'm enjoying my stay here. Thank you. We didn't have any rain. We prognosticated you'd have rain from San Diego all the way.
Thank you very much,
I
Mr.
enjoyed
Thorndike.
a good night's sleep here in town last night. When can I get a definition on these things? Can I get it in the mail at that address I gave you?
Yeah,
Mr. Thorndike, I think the appropriate place would be for you to address those questions, not to this planning commission, but to a P&D staff member who I think can clarify all of those things for you.
I'll go upstairs then. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Gottsteiner. Let's see, next item, moving right along here, we're going to get to the Planning Commissioner's informational reports. By the way, I didn't see anybody else interested in addressing us here, so I'm going to close the public comment period. Commissioner Gottsteiner.
I have nothing to report.
Commissioner Phillips.
Nothing.
And for myself, we did have the County Planning Commission retreat, which I attended, which, as Director Baker said, was quite good and is always a good process. Thank you, staff, on that one. I think the material that comes out of there just makes these things so much more efficient, and so it helps me a lot. It was very good. Planning Commission divisional briefings is the next item on our agenda. And I'm not sure if we have any, I don't believe we have anything on that today.
No briefings this morning, Mr. Chair.
So the next item, moving right along rapidly here, is the minutes. So I would ask my fellow commissioners whether you have any comments or corrections to the minutes of our meeting of January 16th. If not, I would entertain a motion for their
My
approval.
light's on.
Commissioner Gottsteiner, thank you.
Yes, I do have a correction. Well, first of all, I think that staff did a really excellent job of summing up our comments under conceptual review of the Miramar project. I really appreciated the way that was formatted, and I think most of everybody's comments were clear and came through the way they had been made. The only correction that I request is on my comments on the number 6. It says agrees with the Montecito Board of Architectural Review comments to modify the roof eaves. That was not my comment. My comment was roof pitches and ridge lines, not eaves. Just so that we're really clear as to what I think the MBAR and myself were after. Eaves or something doesn't make much difference in the overall picture of things. Thank you.
Commissioner Phillips?
Motion to approve
With,
changes identified.
I'll second that motion. We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. I'll also make the comment that I really did enjoy this format.
Yeah.
It's great for laying this out. So motion and second, all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously.
Mr. Chair, just a comment on an item that was on that day. Your commission probably knows this, but the Lagura matter was appealed to the Board of Supervisors.
Mhm.
And we are expecting that will be heard by the Board of Supervisors on April 1st. So
April 1,
just
thank you.
Wanted to let you know.
I had heard that, but I appreciate you bringing it to the attention of the commission. So with that, it takes us to our standard agenda. We are going to continue item number 1, so I will need a motion. Oh, excuse me. Ms. Oplin, if you would read that item into the record before we can take an action on it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is the hearing on the request of Clearwire USA US LLC to consider case number 07 CUP 74, application filed on October 3rd, 2007, and to accept the exemption pursuant to Section 15303 of the state guidelines for implementation of the California Environmental Quality Act.
Thank you. Now, other than just simply making a motion to continue, is there any other action we need to take? And are we going to set a date for the...
Mr. Chair, I'd recommend that you move to continue this to your March 19th hearing.
Okay. I'd appreciate if Mr. Phillips, maybe you could make that motion for a continuance to March 19th.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. The next item on our standard agenda, and Director Black, unless you feel we can't, we've only spent 15 minutes, so we're right there. I just as soon try to go through this in our traditional order, or the way it's ordered on our agenda for today. So if you're prepared, why don't we move to the Craig lot split, item number 2 on Tiburon Bay Lane.
Mr. Chair, can you give us just a couple of minutes?
Oh, of course.
And
Of
we'll
course.
get the
So we'll take a
presentation set up.
2-minute recess to get set up for item number 2 on our standard agenda.
Great, thank you.
Split. Ms. Oakland, you want to read this item into the record?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is the hearing on the request of Susan Elledge Planning and Permitting Services, Inc., agent for Charles Crail, to consider case number 05 TPM 22, application filed on December 1st, 2005, and to approve the negative declaration 07 NGD 42 pursuant to the state guidelines for implementation of the California Environmental Quality Act.
Thank you very much. We're ready for your presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. I'm going to try to go through this presentation really fast, so I hope you don't mind if I'm speaking a little bit fast, but I know we have a lot to get through this morning. So without further ado, the proposed project is located in the urban area of Montecito. It has agricultural land use and zoning designations, which were designated with adoption of the county's coastal plan in the early 80s, and it was reconfirmed 10 years later with the adoption of the Montecito Community Plan. San Isidro Creek flows across the southeast corner, and it does contain an environmentally sensitive habitat overlay. There's also a flood hazard overlay that's located over the entire parcel, which includes the 100-year floodplain and the more restricted floodway, which is closer to the creek. The surrounding land uses are residential. Brief background, the lot is part of what is known as the Montecito Avocado Ranch, which has been farmed for more than a century. In 1994, the 10 parcels of the Montecito Avocado Ranch were created as a result of the issuance of 10 certificates of compliance and a lot line adjustment. And this picture shows a comparison in 1994 when 2 of the new lots were just beginning to be developed, but you can see essentially what the property looked like, all of the Montecito Ranch looked like by 1994 and today with the development that has occurred on the build out of the smaller properties. 6 of the 10 lots participate in a cooperative farming arrangement, and they grow avocados and lemons. So it's continued to be in active agriculture for a very long time, and it continues to be productive ag site. The proposed project would divide one 10-acre lot into 2 5-acre lots consistent with the agriculture 1-5 zoning, which requires a minimum lot size of 5 acres. Proposed lot 1 on the left-hand side has a small residence already existing on the property, and proposed lot 2 would be undeveloped, and both of them are planted 2 orchards. There are 1.5 acre development envelopes proposed in the northern portions of each of the 2 lots, as far as possible from the creek and outside of the floodway. All future development, both residential and agricultural accessory structures, would be located within the 1.5 acre development envelopes. This would allow unfragmented blocks of prime ag lands to be retained for agricultural production. Primary issues with the property include maintaining the productive prime farmlands in agriculture, which is a requirement of the Coastal Act, and as this property is in the coastal zone. And the protection of ag was reflected in the county's coastal plan policies and in its ag element policies. And it is also, the protection of ag is also reflected in the purpose and intent of the Ag 1 zone district, which is to designate and protect lands appropriate for long-term agricultural use within or adjacent to urbanized areas, and to preserve prime soils. So this designation was applied to the property in the early 80s when Article 2, the Coastal Zoning Ordinance, was first adopted, and it has been maintained with the adoption of the Montecito Community Plan 10 years later. The purpose of the development envelopes would be to limit the scope of the environmental review, because then you can focus your environmental review on potential impacts of future development, where the changes would be, which would be within those development envelopes. Thus, you don't have to analyze impacts of development all over the site, or analyze the potential impacts that the whole site could be developed and all of the ag removed. So that's one of the purposes of having development envelopes. The envelopes also protect the agricultural resources consistent with county policies. They cluster future development in the northern portions of the lots, outside of and as far as possible from the floodway. It also clusters the development as far as possible from the creek, which helps reduce any potential for uncovering sensitive cultural resources, because lands adjacent to creeks in the coastal plain tend to have a higher likelihood of cultural resources being found. And also it ensures that no encroachment from future development would encroach into the ESH that is on the creek. For the environmental review, we prepared a mitigated negative declaration. There were significant but mitigable impacts identified in the resources listed on the screen. All of the impacts were mitigated to less than significant, but I think probably the ones to point out would be with cultural resources. The cultural resources, we did have conduct a surface investigation within the bounds of the development envelopes, and there were no resources found to suspect that there could be any potential, that there would be a potential for a site in those envelopes. Thus, we applied the standard mitigation to stop work in the event, during any kind of grading for construction, in the event anything was discovered unexpectedly. We did receive some comments from the Shumash on the draft ND that stating that they didn't believe our investigation went far enough. And we did provide some additional information and clarification about the investigation that we did conduct. And staff still believes that we did an adequate surface investigation, and that we only needed to investigate the area within the development envelope, because that's where the potential for future disturbance could occur with new development different from what's occurring outside the envelope, which is the ag that's been going on for decades. Let's see. The land use impacts that are identified in the ND specifically are related to the policies that were adopted in the Montecito Community Plan for the mitigation of impacts. So things like aesthetics, air quality, erosion and sediment control, noise that could occur during construction. These impacts are addressed by the standard conditions that have come out and become development standards in the community plan that was finally adopted. And so all of these have been applied to the conditions of approval And as there's nothing specifically particular to this site, so that's why there's not additional mitigation measures that have been put into the document, because the standard measures can handle the specifics on this particular site. Flooding, the development envelopes are located outside of the floodway but still within the floodplain, and essentially what that means is they still require, any future development would still require review by the flood control district, and any structures, particularly habitable structures, would be required to meet certain base flood elevation requirements. But the standards for the development are not as strict as in the floodway, and also county policies limit development in the floodway, and so these envelopes being located outside helps to prevent any kind of potential flooding impacts that could occur if you place development within the floodway. With regard to comments received about agricultural resources, there were comments that the lot split would lead to further loss of agriculture on the property, and that new owners of the new lots might not want to keep the agriculture going. And there was also a comment that the ag accessory structure should be allowed outside of the ag, the 1.5 acre development envelopes. And a couple of points, which I'll go into a little bit more, is one thing to keep in mind is agricultural zoning intent is to keep and maintain and protect lands for agriculture, but there are but at any time, a landowner could decide not to do agriculture, so that's something that could occur with or without the lot split, and it could occur on any of the properties in the area. The primary policy issues associated with the proposed split is the protection of agricultural resources, which are discussed in more detail in your staff report on pages 11 to 13. But again, I point out that the Coastal Act requires the maintenance of a maximum amount of prime lands in ag production, and the Coastal Act also looks for assurance that all divisions of prime ag lands not diminish the productivity, and that's actually a specific finding that we have to make in order to approve a lot split on agricultural lands. I've mentioned the ag zoning already before, and there are also the agricultural, other agricultural policies, including those in the agricultural element, which point to retaining blocks of productive agriculture within urban areas and to recognize the importance of the objectives of the Right to Farm Ordinance. The Right to Farm Ordinance is a separate county-approved document that recognizes the importance of preserving and protecting ag lands. And one of the goals of the ordinance is to warn prospective buyers of lands that are adjacent to agriculture that there are ag operations going on in and around their property, and that the farmers who are farming those ag lands have a right to continue to pursue that, and their standard practices should not be considered nuisances. And that is achieved through requiring the recordation of a notice to property owners, so that any future property owner, when they buy the property, will find that that this is there. And finally, I mention again the purpose and intent of the agricultural zoning. There have been some questions that have come up since the staff report was prepared about the how the development envelope would be used and whether agricultural structures would be allowed outside of the development envelope. And again, we have proposed development envelopes that are actually quite large for the size of the lots. They're 1.5 acres each, which represents at least 30% of the properties. And these development envelopes are large enough to accommodate both residential development and agricultural accessory structures. The staff report points out that and provides a comparison that no more than 1 acre of each of the lots that are in the Montecito Avocado Ranch area, that have been developed with residential, even the lots that are larger than an acre, they've never used more than an acre to devote to that residential development. And that just, it supports the fact that at an acre, even Montecito style development hasn't required more than an acre in this area, and that if you were to follow that same kind of development, you'd still have half an acre left over for doing agricultural accessory structures. A comparison with a couple of other ag subdivisions found that in those subdivisions, they actually proposed smaller development envelopes, only an acre, and the lots were much larger. The smallest lot was 10 acres in size, and the largest was 40 acres. So the development envelopes were actually a much smaller percentage of the overall property, which allowed more of the lands to remain available for the agriculture production. We had some questions comparing this with what would be allowed under the uniform rules if this property were eligible and were and had a contract under the Williamson Act. If that were the case on a 5-acre property, they would be allowed no more than a 10,000 square foot development envelope for residential purposes. In that case, they could have agricultural structures outside the residential envelope, but their limits are quite strict under the Williamson Act. So this proposal is much more generous, and we do feel that it still can be supported or supports our policies and our findings for allowing this proposed lot split. Also, we have no clear evidence of a need for additional space. In consultation with agricultural planning, the agricultural planner has actually considered, in her experience working for the agricultural commissioner in this county for many years, similar sized projects with orchards, very small orchards, and has looked at how these standard practices occur, and she doesn't find that that these other orchards show a great need for needing a large area for storing agricultural equipment, or having larger agricultural buildings on the site that would necessitate having a larger envelope or allowing ag structures outside of the proposed envelopes. And finally, if the environmental analysis was focused solely on all future development being contained within the envelope. So if there were to be any changes, there would have to be additional environmental review conducted in order to determine whether there could be a potential for impacts outside of those envelopes. And, well, I missed my last slide. Which I conclude with staff's recommendation that you adopt the findings for the project, including the CEQA findings, and approve the negative declaration. Also adopt a point allocation of 85 points under the MGMO. That would be for proposed Lot 2, which is not developed, and so they would be able to use those points in the future for acquiring an allocation and developing a residence, and then approve the lot split. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. Commissioners, questions of staff before we have the applicant make its presentation? Yeah.
Just quickly, I promise. The policy seems to be to keep agricultural land agricultural. And there must be a line somewhere you're looking at wherein this looks like too much residential, and now we're losing that agricultural zoning integrity. Do you know where that is?
Well, each project and site has to be looked at on a specific case-by-case basis, and I consulted a great deal with our agricultural planner, Stephanie Stark, and we worked a lot discussing this project and discussing where to, I guess, kind of draw the line on what is still maintaining viable ag on this property. And our conclusion is that it really is kind of a borderline situation. We have a 10-acre property that's very heavily planted to orchard with only a small area where the residence is located in the northeast corner. But we also have an agricultural site that's already divided by a road that cuts up the center of the property that was developed when the lot line adjustment was approved back in 1994. So we weighed all of these things. We weighed, and we also kept in consideration that we have these 1.5 acre envelopes that are proposed, and that all the development, including ag accessory structures, would be there. So where the potential loss for ag would be strictly within those envelopes, and the rest of the area would be protected for the ag production in the prime lands. And it was our conclusion that this particular project would not actually trigger an impact to the agricultural resources because we had some of these things already in place. The proposed development envelope was already part of that project, and because we already had some other impacts that occurred to the agriculture in the past, such as the other the lot line adjustment, the certificates of compliance in the early 90s, and the construction of the road up through the center of the property that already splits that ag field into these two separate entities.
So we're close, you say, to possibly a different decision, but not there yet. You also said that the owner at any time can request a different zoning application and just have it become residential? Is that, did I understand that?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Phillips, that's not what I said. I think the point I was trying to make is a landowner can choose to farm his land or not choose to farm his land, and he can choose to farm whatever crop he wants to. It's orchards. This property's been in orchards for decades. They were, I think, nuts in the long ago
Almonds
past, and now they're
almonds.
avocados and lemons. But if these trees reached the end of their lifespan, they could plant more orchards. They could go to some kind of row crop, or they could decide not to farm, and that's the landowner's right. They can choose to do so or not. But if they were to have a different zoning to be residential, that's a different process that would require a request to rezone the property to residential, which would require approval or a recommendation of approval from your commission. It would require approval from the Board of Supervisors and certification from the Coastal Commission.
So if this landowner continues this process, we saw from 94 to 2006 an increasing amount of residential use. At one point, your office will say, you're not agricultural anymore. You have to go for a different zoning? Is that where, if this continues, is this where this will go?
Mr. Chair, I don't think, and Commissioner Phillips, I don't think we would ever suggest that they should rezone the property. I think we would simply recommend that your commission or the Board of Supervisors on appeal not approve a specific project because
I see.
it would essentially change the character of the property from agriculture to something else.
I see.
So what we
So a tipping point is what you're looking
yes,
for.
and what we're trying to accomplish in our review process, and what the commission is charged to do, is to review applications consistent with the policies that are in our local coastal program, the Montecito Community Plan, and those policies call for maintenance of productive agricultural lands. So what we've done in this particular lot split is we've done a CEQA document that analyzed in a fair amount of detail the productivity of the property, and concluded that it's marginally productive at its current size and would remain marginally productive at its proposed two 5-acre parcel sizes. This is not a property that's high on the point scale and is remaining high. It's right on the fringe, and that's why we're pretty sensitive to any changes that might even decrease that productivity by a small margin.
But we're not maintaining the current level of productivity. This would necessarily decrease it.
It would necessarily decrease it, but we still believe that it would be a viable, productive operation.
Thank you.
I'm reminded that we should discuss our ex parte communication and site visits. Commissioner Phillips?
I
would you-
visited the site.
Commissioner Gottsninger?
I visited the site and I had no ex parte communication.
For myself, I've visited the site many times and no ex parte communications. I do have a question of staff on this. When the applicant proposed the building envelopes of 1.5 acres out of a 5-acre parcel, was there consideration, how did you, I know you discussed this, but I'm not sure if I really understood whether you considered ratcheting that down in an effort to further preserve the agricultural viability of the remaining portion. 1.5 acres is close to a third of the lot, which is, that's, by Montecito standards, larger than a normal, our average lot in this area is probably 1 acre.
Mr. Chair, when the application was still incomplete, we did have some discussions about development envelopes. How big would they be? Should they have residential structure? Should they be just for the residential structure? Should ag structures be included, or should they be allowed outside? And those discussions were had in meetings, site visits, looking at the plans and talking about it. But there was no conclusion about what would be the most appropriate envelope and what should be in or outside of those envelopes. And so when those discussions were had, it was a year later before we had a resubmittal that we were able to, and we were able to deem the application complete and start doing the environmental review. And at that time, this was the applicant's proposal, and so they had everything else for calling an application complete, and so we accepted that and we moved forward with their proposed project description.
Okay, thank you. A related question is the, I believe it's referred to as the combined farming agreement. Now that is, the continuation of that is not a condition of the approval, and it wasn't related to any of the other, when this, the certificates of compliance, obviously, they didn't have any sort of joint farming agreement. The reason I bring this one up is I know one of the things that makes agriculture viable is to have a big enough parcel to make it operate, and obviously the joint farming would go a long ways towards that effort. But I guess we're a little late in the game to try to make that work for the entire site. I just know from my own perspective on my own lot, it was formerly agriculture and broken into 1-acre sites, and it's very difficult to make those work on any kind of a practical basis. And so you really wonder how big it has to be for an individual to really get any viability out of it. But that's more or less a comment, not a question, I guess. Further questions of staff before we move on to the applicant's presentation? Okay. Then I'm going to open the public hearing, and we're ready for the applicant's presentation.
Thank you, Chairman Barrett, Commissioners. I'm Laurel Perez with Suzanne Elledge, Planning and Permitting Services, and just want to start off by telling you how pleased we are to be here. It's been a road, quite a long road, and we thank staff for their work and their assisting us through this process. We're representing the Crail family, and today we have Charles and Jeremy Crail with us. And we also have Tim Buffalo of Buffalo Land Management, who manages the orchards for the Crails. He also assists on the other parcel involved in the farming co-op. And at this point, I would like to introduce Claudia Sagona from our office. She's been with us for about 6 months now and has been managing the Crail project since that time. She's a senior planner in our office, and she comes to us with about 17 years of public sector planning experience, and she will be conducting our presentation this morning. But we are all here to answer questions and to engage in discussion at your commission's request. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Perez.
I don't know if we can dim some of those lights. Good morning. Thank you again, and I want to thank staff again for their presentation and also their recommendation to approve the lot split. We think it's a fairly straightforward project. As you can see from the overview, the property is bordered by Jameson Lane to the south and then further to the south by Highway 101. And it's set within essentially an urbanized area. Oops. Okay. Got ahead of myself, sorry. Okay, sorry about that. And as Julie mentioned, the property already functions as two separate 5-acre parcels due to the bisection by Tiburon Bay Lane. And the lot split would be consistent with the Ag 1-5 zoning in that it creates two 5-acre parcels. As you can see from this overview of the parcel map, the project includes, as Julie mentioned, creation of two 1.5-acre development envelopes along the northerly portion of the project sites. These were selected in part due to maintain the visual aspect of the project into the site so that future residences would be sited to the north in the rear portion of the property. And as Julie mentioned, to avoid the boundary of the floodway that exists. As Julie mentioned, the lot split is consistent with county zoning and county ag policies, and the mitigated negative declaration did conclude that there would not be any significant impacts. Julie mentioned that staff is conditioning the project to require that all development, including agricultural structures, be located within the 1.5-acre development envelopes. We disagree with the staff's position on this aspect and would appreciate the Commission's consideration and discussion on this aspect. We believe that confining agricultural structures to the residential development envelopes would unnecessarily limit and restrict potentially the agricultural productivity and viability of the project. It has always been Mr. Crail's intent to include agricultural structures exclude agricultural structures from the development envelopes. They were always intended to restrict only residential uses, and one of the earlier letters from Planning and Development acknowledged that allowing agricultural structures to be located outside of those development envelopes would be, best serving of the agricultural operations on the site. Just looking back again at the Ag 1-5 zone for a moment, the existing zoning allows for all types of agricultural uses, including buildings and structures associated with those uses. And the Ag 1-5 zoning does not place restrictions on where development can take place. And we do not think the lot split itself should place new restrictions on that as a result. What kind of structures are we talking about? Potentially barns, storage buildings for ag equipment and chemicals related to the agricultural operation, farm animal shelters, workshops. One of the things that's been mentioned is even a fruit stand on North Jameson. As you'll see, there's this area at the entrance, just on the west side of the entrance, that would be an ideal location for a produce stand. So having to build these structures within a restricted and potentially arbitrary envelope could hinder productivity and unnecessarily restrict farming decisions. The growers need the flexibility to determine where to site an ag structure to best serve that operation. Julie spoke for a moment about the agricultural preserve status, and we would just again reiterate that the project is not within ag preserve status. It's not eligible for ag preserve status. And even if it were and was subject to those heightened levels of regulation, the uniform rules acknowledges that ag structures, should be remotely sited from residential development to avoid land use conflicts between the ag production and the residential use, and that flexibility again promotes agriculture. So what we're asking the commission to consider is to allow ag-related structures outside the proposed development envelopes. In a sense, we're talking about parcel 1 on the west side of the road. At present time, parcel 2 is constrained by the floodway. However, in the event that FEMA alters the mapping in the future, we would like to still obtain that flexibility to have ag structures located outside that development envelope. And the fundamental principle and intent of the county's agricultural policies have to do with recognizing the rights and the freedom of choice for growers to best determine how to maintain their operation in a viable way. And that part of those management decisions which affect the viability of their operation would be to determine where to best site an agricultural structure to best support that operation. Staff has mentioned that the 1.5 acres is more than adequate to contain both agricultural structures as well as residential structures. That may be the case. However, it takes away the flexibility for a grower to determine where to best site that. I would also point out that it is not uncharacteristic within the Montecito area to see residential development encompass more than an acre to an acre and a half. And just to give you an example, from the property to the north, the area of that site that's devoted to residential use is approximately an acre, maybe just under an acre. But again, the point that we're trying to make is that growers need the flexibility and the freedom to determine where to best place an ag structure on the parcel. And the other thing I'll mention is that I think there's been some assumption that, an owner is going to obliterate the entire 1.5 acres and remove all the trees. What we're really talking about in creating a 1.5 acre development envelope is providing a homeowner the flexibility as to where to best site the home within that envelope. There should not be a foregone conclusion that that future homeowner would then remove all of the trees within that development envelope. And in this case, it's most likely that on parcel 2, that a residence would be sited to the far east to capture views of the mountains, because there's quite a bit of landscaping on that existing parcel to the north around that residence. Again, the project objective, and this was Mr. Crail's objective, was to confine and constrain the residential development and use to maintain the land in agricultural productivity by providing needed flexibility to avoid conflicts between agricultural and residential uses, not only between the property and the adjoining parcels, but within the site itself, so that the agricultural operation is not unduly affecting the future residents with nuisances such as dust, noise, and odor. And there's safety concerns with regard to storage of chemicals involved in agricultural operations. And I will be wrapping up in just a moment, but I think what I want to emphasize with regard to the environmental analysis is that the existing zoning and land use designation allows agricultural structures. The location for these structures is not restricted by the zoning. The purpose of the California Environmental Quality Act is to look at the change that results from a project, to look at what happens beyond the existing setting as a result of the project. The existing setting of this project and of this site is that currently agricultural structures could be developed anywhere on that property without restriction. Therefore, that is the baseline. The change is, the proposal to confine residential structures. As far as the cultural resources aspect of it, there's currently the ability to build an ag structure anywhere on the parcel. The parcel map would actually afford a greater protection in that it can be conditioned so that if something is discovered during ground disturbing activities, that there would be notification to the county. Currently, that protection doesn't exist. And then just referring to the county's initial study, the initial study itself identifies that the intent of the building envelopes is to restrict the conversion of prime agricultural land to non-agricultural uses. We would submit that an ag structure that's critical to an agricultural operation is an agricultural use and therefore should not be restricted to the development envelope. So in conclusion, again, the lot split's consistent with county zoning and comprehensive plan designations. It would designate residential development envelopes that avoid the property constraints, and doing so would promote agricultural viability on the property. Allowing ag structures outside that development envelope would provide continued flexibility for agricultural support structures. It would help foster opportunities for long-term agricultural viability and productivity by leaving the operational decisions up to the grower who knows best how to operate their property in a profitable manner. Again, further CEQA analysis is not warranted because this request to allow ag structures outside that development envelope does not represent a change in the current setting. It's not a change in the current conditions. And again, the county could impose the condition regarding the cultural resources so that if something is unearthed in the future, that there certainly be notification. That concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions of the applicant?
Thank you.
We may have some questions for you as we go forward here. Does that conclude your presentation? That being the case, if there's no questions of staff at this point, then I'll move on to opening us to members of the public. And I have one speaker slip here. Karen Drown. Sorry if I mispronounced your name.
Oh, okay. Mr. Chair, I believe the woman who came up said she had submitted a letter, and could she speak first? That was Karen Drown. Okay. Then she had to leave for a doctor's appointment.
That's interesting because I don't remember seeing her letter. So.
Mr. Chair, we do have a letter that was sent in response to the draft environmental document. It's not attached, but I have it in the file here. If you would like, I can.
And was that from?
That
Ms.
was from
Drown?
Karen Drown, yes.
From Karen Drown.
Well, I would request staff to have a look at that letter and see, because her assumption was that whatever she had said in that letter would be enough to offset her being able to make her public comment in person. So I do think we at least need to either submit the letter into our records or hear what the letter had to say, one way or another.
I would agree.
We'll read it.
Great.
Julie indicates it's not very lengthy, so
Right.
we'll just read
In
it.
the interim, do we have anybody else that wishes to address us on this item? Not seeing anyone, I'll close the time for public comment.
So, Mr. Chair, if it's okay with you.
Yes,
I'll
please.
go ahead and read it. It's titled Concerns of a Neighboring Property Owner About the Crail Lot Split, and then indicates the parcel number. The 10 acres of lemons are adjacent to my 5-acre parcel. Because small parcels of lemons are not agriculturally independent, we must cooperate. In the last 3 years, Mr. Crail has changed packing houses 3 times. This makes operation and contract signing difficult. He first told me he was going organic, and later it was demonstrated that he was using traditional methods. I hope that measures will be in place to encourage continuing the farming operations. Recently, my neighbor to the north, Jeffrey Montgomery, ignored CC&Rs and removed about an acre of his avocados. If farming is to continue in Montecito, it must be respected. If lemons are pulled out, we must consider change of use. As to the location of the house site on the eastern proposed parcel, it is next to San Isidro Creek. When houses are built to the north of my parcel for the Rames and Montgomery property, soil was hauled out for months. Huge truck and trailers moved the soil, which would not compact for months, and later months of trips were made to bring in new soil. It would appear to be environmentally sound to locate the house on the eastern parcel, number 2, closer to Tiburon to avoid this needless pollution. Thank you for your consideration, Karen Drown.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Phillips.
Is there a difference in the tax result, residential versus agricultural in this case? Is there a different formula?
Well, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Phillips, I think I'll try and answer this one. This property will be, or is taxed as agricultural
Agricultural.
property. So the agricultural value of the property is its base. Any improvements are also taxed. So if those improvements are, extensive residential development, they'll be taxed as such.
Is
the
the,
property
assuming
taxes.
this lot is approved, will the new lot owner have a higher tax burden or a lower tax burden than a typical residential owner because of the agricultural status?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Phillips, I think you are probably wandering into a realm where I'm not entirely qualified to answer your question, but I'll try anyway. It's my understanding that agricultural property on the whole is taxed at a lower rate for just the property value. Residential property is more valuable in this county than agriculturally zoned property, but the improvements themselves would be taxed at the same rate whether they were residential or sitting on residential land or agricultural land. So tax bills are broken between land value and improvement value. So the improvement value, I think, would remain the same.
But the land value would be less.
That's my understanding.
Thank you.
What are the allowed accessory uses in an ag area? In other words, if we granted the applicant's request to modify this, what kind of structures could be put on there that would not be allowed under a traditional residential development? I realize we have a building envelope, so in this case, nothing. But if we were to modify that, what is an ag building, and what kind of constraints? I mean, because it's going to be different than a residential lot where there's very defined uses and sizes. And I would assume that it's pretty, just based on what I know about our ag policies, it's pretty freewheeling in terms of what you're allowed to do on an ag site in terms of sizes and uses. I mean, conceivably, we could have somebody put up a 20,000-foot structure for farm equipment or whatever.
Mr. Chair, we're getting the definition of an agricultural accessory structure, but they're structures that are used as accessory to the primary agricultural use, which is actually the production of food, fiber.
Yeah, I'm not
et cetera.
suggesting they would want to, but conceivably they could decide they want a lemon packing house on their site or a chiller or something else, right?
Some structures, depending on the kind of structure it is, they may require additional discretionary review. For example, greenhouses larger than 20,000 square feet in size would require a development plan. Although a greenhouse is not considered an agricultural accessory structure, a greenhouse is actually a primary structure for a primary type of agriculture.
Gotcha. Well, let's see what we've got
So
here.
an accessory
If you wouldn't, she's going to read first.
accessory agricultural building or structure is defined and I'm reading from Article 2, which is still applicable in this portion of Montecito. An accessory building or structure containing no kitchen or cooking facilities and designed and constructed primarily for use and used in housing farm implements or supplies, hay, grain, poultry, livestock, or horticultural products where such buildings or structures are located in agriculturally zoned areas. So that's the definition. So barns and
Barn.
sheds
Right.
and corrals.
Commissioner Gottsinger?
Um, does that include employee housing? I mean, if you had ag employees, you know, I'm just thinking about what's going on with the Fairview Gardens right now, and there's a whole
Miss-
thing going on there.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Gottstinker, I would say no, because the definition specifically precludes a structure containing a kitchen or cooking facilities. An ag employee dwelling is really a different class of structure.
But, okay, I'm kind of working this through. I wasn't prepared to think about all this. But, so then, inside that definition, there really is no limitation to the number and size of the ag buildings. Is that accurate?
Yes, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Gottstinker, that's
Okay.
accurate. I guess, just to kind of summarize, the condition as is suggested in the staff report and analyzed in the ND would require all structures be located within that 1.5 acre building envelope. So I don't want to mislead you into thinking that, oh, well, you could have a second, a farm employee unit or some other non-agricultural unit located outside the envelope. I think the intent is very clear,
Right.
that all structures would be within
Yeah,
that.
Yeah, you know, I get that. I'm sort of what I'm doing is weighing the applicant's request against the staff recommendations.
Exactly.
You know, so I'm trying to understand that, because we hadn't really, inside of staff's recommendations, we really hadn't looked at the possibility of any buildings outside of the building envelopes up until the applicant's request came to us this morning. So that's why I'm kind of struggling with this a little bit.
If, Mr. Chair?
Yes, Ms. Morris.
If I may just add one extra comment about that condition. That condition was placed in there because the use is defined in development envelopes, and what is allowed or excluded outside of development envelopes need to be very clear so that in the future everybody knows what can and be allowed in and outside of the development envelopes. The purpose of this envelope is several-fold because it protects, it is defining an area to maintain blocks of ag that can be maintained in production and not used for accessory buildings, but actually maintained in production, because if you continue to take more and more out of production, eventually you're going to have no agriculture that an accessory structure is going to support. The envelopes also, the condition also clarifies that and supports the fact that the cultural resource analysis focused on the development envelopes, and it follows that and continues to protect the cultural resources as well as the floodway and more than enough setbacks for ESH. So.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask the applicant to address us on this point, if you would. Maybe you could expand on why this issue of accessory structures outside the development areas come up, and exactly what it is you have in mind. You mentioned a produce stand, which I'm not sure if is something we necessarily want to see out there in the first place. But maybe you can expand on what you had in mind.
Sure. A couple of things I wanted to mention was that, MBAR approval, Board of Architecture Review approval would be required for any structure on the property, including an agricultural structure. The other limitation that does exist in the Ag 1.5 zoning is, and this is a cumulative 20,000 square foot maximum structural development on the property, after which you reach a requirement for a development plan. So, I wanted to dispel the notion that they could build as many buildings as they want, really any place. And what it gets down to, and maybe Mr. Buffalo or Mr. Crail can speak more to, the need for this flexibility, there's going to be less of an incentive for a residence and an owner, future owner, to continue an operation which is significantly impacting their residents. So to have the ability to move those operational components to another location on the site where it would better serve the picking and the processing of the agricultural product is really an essential component of maintaining that property in successful agricultural operation. And that's really what it's about. It's about leaving farming decisions up to the farmer so that they can determine where to best site those structures.
Thank you very much. Unless there's other applicant or questions of the applicant, yes, you wish to address this.
May I speak? I'm Charles Crail, the applicant, and Mr. Buffalo here.
You said you're Mr. Crail, is that
Yes,
correct?
yes. One thing I wanted to clarify is that the taxes on the property now, the property's being taxed as a residence. There's no rate for agriculture. So all of our parcels, 10 acre parcels, are taxed as a residence. My thought was that, and I'd like to have Mr. Buffalo speak to you a little bit about these buildings and why it's not advisable to have them next to a residence, would be, I don't mind having the 1.5 acre envelope or total development envelope, but I'd like to possibly have it where you could have, say you take a 1/2 acre out of that building envelope for residents, and then you place the other in the agricultural. So still at the end of the day, you have 1.5 acres of potential structures, but they might not be together. So you might have an area for the ag buildings, so they're not right next to the residents. But I'd like to have Mr. Buffalo, and also one other issue was, we are going organic, which I differ with Ms. Drown's letter, and Tim can explain the time period it takes to go from regular fertilizers and what we use to organic, and he could fill you in more on that because he's actually managing. Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Crail.
Mr. Crail, before
Mr.
you go,
Phillips.
did you say that another possibility would be to designate a 1/2 acre building envelope to residential and then an acre for the continuation of the ag function?
No, what I was suggesting is that if we could have it so if you had a 1.5 acre building envelope, and at some point the owner decided to build, say, a 1/4 acre of ag structures, that they don't have to be together. They could be separate, as long as the total envelope doesn't exceed 1.5 acres.
Well, why do you think that a residential owner would want to have an ag structure? They're going to have swimming pools. They're going to have landscape yards, probably.
True. That's why we are suggesting that if they're planting, for example, those lemon trees are old now, and it's been recommended they be replaced because they're almost 40 years old. One of the suggestions was just putting in a tree farm. So there would be forklifts and tractors that you use for tree farming, Christmas tree farming, we don't know. Our goal is to keep it looking, even if we did tree farming, to keep the perimeter areas with the kind of fruit trees that you see now, just because of I think it adds to the character of the property and preserves that look.
So do you think that should you result in a lot for a residential use, that a different kind of residential user will be attracted to this because of the agricultural zoning?
I do.
You do?
Mhm.
I see. I got it. Okay.
Do you want to explain?
Mr. Crail, I don't think we need to hear about your farming policies, because I
No.
don't think it's pertinent to our decision today. But I appreciate that we're prepared to do that. But I think what's in front of us is really more of a land use decision. So if you don't have anything else on that point, we'd like to proceed. Doesn't appear we have any other questions of the applicant, so I'm going to close the public hearing and put it to the commissioners for deliberation and motion. Commissioner Gotsteiner.
Well, okay, so we have the proposal in front of us, and the applicant is proposing something else. For me, the only way that I could consider having the agricultural structures outside of the 1.5 acre building envelope would be to significantly reduce the building envelope. It's a trade-off for me. Somehow we're trying to protect the agricultural viability of this property. Now, if you're growing, I understand that you've got to have tractors and barns and all of those kind of things, but every time you place a structure on a piece of property, you lose the dirt underneath that property. That's what it's ag dirt. It's like the dirt we're after, not the structures that support what we're growing on the dirt, So, that would be the only way that I could consider the applicant's request, would be if the building envelopes themselves were significantly, an acre and a half is a lot of residential building. It allows a lot, as we all know, in Montecito, even more than sometimes we'd like to see. But, and then we're going to put more buildings outside of that, so essentially we're wiping out, really, the viability, in my opinion, anyway. So that's the only way I would be willing to go with that. And, if the applicant doesn't want to go back to the drawing boards and work this out with staff, and this would be my question also of staff is, was this discussed prior to this hearing, prior to this project? You stated that you'd been working on it for a year. I'm kind of surprised that this all came up now.
Mr.
It's
Chair,
okay that
Commissioner
it did, but
Gotsteiner, much of this really detailed discussion came about after the initial study was prepared, and we talked about the development envelope in the initial study. And we spoke with the applicant. They wanted us to go ahead and release the draft ND and not change our analysis, and then to continue to have these discussions with staff. So we continue to have the discussions as we prepared for this hearing.
Mr.
Yeah,
Chair, I
please.
don't mean to interrupt your deliberations, but if the commission were to choose to go in the direction that that Commissioner Gottstinker's suggested might be a compromise, I don't think we could do it today.
I was going to say we'd have to continue this item.
Because I think we have some work to do on the
Right.
environmental document.
Right, that would be my take on it. Commissioner Phillips, do you have any questions or comments?
I do. I guess I'm going to make it even worse. I can't support the findings. I find the purpose and intent of the agricultural zoning is to enhance and preserve agricultural use, not to further residential use. I'm not convinced that a residential owner is going to engage in an agricultural endeavor on an acre and a half. I don't think we can condition sales based on that. Otherwise, it's just we're slowly losing this agricultural entity. That may be a good thing or it may be a bad thing. But right now, it's a coastal act policy, and it is the thing, and I just certainly can't support it.
I appreciate that comment. I have a question. What would you think if we were to, and I'll put this to staff, what if we required the total development area within the building envelope to not exceed an acre? In other words, you have a building envelope, which is the area in which buildings can be located or a site can be developed, as the applicant suggested. They didn't need the whole site, but they're not sure exactly where they're going to want to place. Could we add an additional condition to require that the total developed area, that would be buildings, lawns, et cetera, not exceed an acre in size? And if we did that, and I'm wondering if my fellow commissioner might find that more acceptable as a...
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Maybe we can let her
Yeah,
answer.
you want to answer that?
Mr. Chair, I think you could certainly do that. I'm presuming what you're saying is you would have an acre and a half development envelope, and you would include a condition that says not more than an acre of that could
Would-
be
Could be actually developed.
developed
They would
with
have to pick within that,
structures,
within that,
lawns,
because you've done your
landscaping.
environmental analysis within that zone, so conceivably, any place in that zone is developable, but not the
Right.
whole amount. The intention being to preserve the maximum agricultural viability. Well,
That was going to be my second
Yeah, the ag-
question too, is
Well,
would they
I-
be within or
I think
without
we're,
that 1 acre
um,
total? But yes, surely, I mean, we
okay.
could do.
I just
probably
wondered whether it
anything.
was an option.
You know, Mr. Chair, I see where you're going, and I'd like to go there as well, but I think we have evidence, we have testimony that this is a marginal agricultural endeavor as it is. We're going to decrease viability. I would like to see in these situations the owner saying, I have a financial hardship. My intention is to keep the agricultural use going, which is the purpose of the zoning and therefore I need some relief financially to continue the bigger objective. This looks like it's land banking to sell lots, and that can't be the intent of this zone.
Okay.
So-
I appreciate that. And to answer Commissioner Gottsanger's question, I just don't find the agricultural accessory structure argument compelling that they need it at all. So, because I think in these instances, you can contract out and have a lot of these kind of things off-site. It doesn't need to be on-site. So I had sort of dismissed that argument already. So I think we've discussed this one enough. Anybody willing to make a motion? Commissioner Gottstanger, you look like you might want to make a motion.
You look like I would.
I'll try a motion, okay. I'm going to make a motion to adopt staff recommendation. 1, 2, 3, and, yeah.
To move, you're recommending, you're moving the staff's recommendations in section 2.
Yeah.
I'll second the motion. Moved and seconded to adopt the staff's recommendation. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Aye. Motion passes 2-1. We are now moving on to item number 3 on our standard agenda. Which is 750 Riven Rock Road, the Rotuli. How's this been pronounced? Anybody know? Radiola lot split. Thank you. Yeah, did we? We'll take a couple minute break while you guys set up for item number 3. Three on our, and I can't seem to get this name into my head. We'll call it 750 Riven Rock Road. How's that? Rautiola. And Jessica Opland, would you please read it into the record?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is the hearing on the request of Pat Yoakum, agent for the owner, Norm Ratiola, to consider case number 03 TPM 22, application filed on November 26, 2003, and to approve the negative declaration 07 NGD 40 pursuant to the state guidelines for implementation of the California Environmental Quality Act.
Thank you. Mr. Briggs, we're ready for your presentation whenever you are.
In the interest of time, I'm just going to do a real brief introduction, and then I'm going to show you one slide that I think will tell pretty much the whole story. And assuming that you've read the staff report, I think that you'd be fully informed. So,
I never read them before we get here. Oh, I'm just kidding. I can prove it.
So the project site is located in an urban portion of the Montecito Community Plan at the corner of Riven Rock and Hot Springs Road, addressed as 750 Riven Rock Road. The property is 9.14 gross acres in size and is zoned 3E1. The project would essentially take the existing 9-acre parcel and divide it into three 3-acre resultant parcels in a configuration that you see here. We have 2 development envelopes on the undeveloped lots that you can see here in red. And then we have an existing residence on proposed parcel 1. And also shown here in orange are the driveway locations. These driveway locations and the envelopes would be recorded with the map so that the locations of all that stuff would be known into the future. And then this is the final slide I wanted to show you. The main resource on site that we looked at are several stands of mature oak trees. And you can see that we've got one here on parcel 3, another here on parcel 2, smaller one down here on parcel 2, and then a fourth one over here on parcel 1. In addition to the stands of oaks, we also have a stand of eucalyptus trees. This stand of eucalyptus trees here is not identified as a butterfly overwintering site. And additionally, we had a bio report done for this property, and the bio report did not identify this as a roosting site. As you can see, the development envelopes and driveways are attempting to avoid the stands of trees. And you can see here there are some ornamental trees within this one here, but we are attempting to avoid the majority of the oak trees. We did circulate a negative declaration for public comment. We got very few public comments back. I did get a call from someone in the surrounding neighborhood who has some drainage concerns, and I believe they did fill out a speaker slip, so you'll be hearing from them. Staff's recommendation is to adopt the required findings, approve the negative declaration and the mitigation monitoring program, and then approve the project as conditioned. Thank you.
Mr. Briggs, I have a question for you. Having walked the site a couple times, I know and I think the applicant's done a good job of locating the building envelopes in the places I would probably think they work best. But we have our specimen tree, the issue of specimen trees, because although they're not native, those palm trees are, they're very attractive and nice. I would call them specimen trees. And also a couple of the eucalyptus in the back. I think that's a good building envelope, but I just wonder how we reconcile some of our tree policies with finding the best site. And just wondered if you could comment on staff's analysis on that point.
Sure, Mr. Chair. As you said, these seem to be the best locations for these development envelopes. With regard to the development envelope here on parcel 2, the specimen trees that I think you're talking about are some fairly beautiful palm trees.
Large palm trees, probably left over from the original,
Correct.
old estate up there.
That's correct. And one option for these trees would be relocation, if possible. I'm not an arborist, I'm not sure, but I've seen that before. And with respect to the eucalyptus trees, this is just the location that they're proposing to use for the development envelope, and we could do mitigation for any trees removed at that point. So if we did remove half a dozen specimen trees, we could require an arborist report. And
I'm not so much recommending we do that because the site is very treed. It's not. I don't think adding additional vegetation in here would necessarily improve it. And I guess my question is it's really not so much directed at the eucalyptus. It was really looking at those 3 large palms.
Mr. Chair, if I could just amplify a bit, I think the policy that you're referring to is Policy Bio M 1.15, and that policy reads, to the maximum extent feasible, specimen trees shall be preserved.
Right.
Obviously, when there are native trees and a woodland on site, we're gonna prioritize preservation of that first, and I think the staff and the applicant have appropriately done that. The policy that I started to read goes on to indicate that there are specimen trees that have unusual scenic or aesthetic qualities, and that those should be preserved to the maximum extent feasible as well. So there's certainly wiggle room in the policy to say this constitutes what we believe is to the maximum extent feasible. I agree with you. I don't think this site is one where I would want to see replacement of trees at a 10-to-1 ratio because it's
No.
already quite wooded.
It's wooded.
If I own this property, which is never going to happen, even though I guess it will be for sale, I couldn't imagine taking those palms out and not doing something with them because people, box and
Right.
buy palms all the time. So I
Yeah, so you're
would be
suggesting
very
it's-
surprised
it's
if somebody
probab-
would just take
It's
those
probably going to
trees out.
happen of its own weight.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's probably an excellent comment. As much as anything, I just wanted to examine how the staff's thinking works when you see an issue where there is such a some really quite old and quite wonderful old trees there, although not native.
Chair, can I just continue with that? If they are
Commissioner.
specimen, and they look specimen to me as well, just the assumption that they'll be marketable doesn't seem to be enough protection. Can we condition that to somehow protect them so that we at least do lip service to the policy of protecting these things? Is there a way to put them somewhere else on the property or make sure they're properly sold or something like that?
I'll let staff comment back.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, yes, I think you can do that. I
Right.
honestly don't think you need to, but I think you can.
Thank you. So that's the conclusion of staff's report. Is the applicant going to make a presentation on this project? If you are, we're ready for you.
Good
Oh,
morning,
I'm
Mr.
sorry. And before you start, our site visits, Commissioner Phillips, you did, I take it? Commissioner Gottsinger?
Yes.
And I have as well. I've been on the site a couple times. And I received I take it none of us received any phone calls or communications outside of here. So please.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. My name is Pat Yoakum, and I'm pleased to be before your commission here today. Again, in the sense of brevity, as Mr. Briggs has indicated, that I'd actively participated in the project, in the environmental process, and also going back to the Montecito community plan that I was involved with this piece of property as well. I would like to reserve the opportunity to discuss conditions at the appropriate time, and then I have a suggestion for one of the condition letters that came in from transportation, also a clarification. So both myself and then counsel for Mr. Radiola, Mr. Fell are present here to answer either individually or collectively any questions or comments that may arise.
Okay. Commissioners, do you have any questions of the applicant? Not seeing any. We do have, I'm going to open their public comment period then, and I do have one speaker slip from Aaron Burston at 725 Riven Rock, interested in speaking to us concerning water drainage and trees.
Thank you. Good morning. My name's Arnold Bruston, and I live at 725 Riven Rock Road. 725 Riven Rock Road.
Where is that located adjacent to
That
the
is
site?
directly across the street.
Across the street.
You all probably know the home because it's one of the oldest homes in Montecito. It was the original stagecoach stop, and it was built in the 1850s. And as best that I know, we've owned it for 20 years. We have never experienced any water runoff problems. Right now, and I don't know whether it's related to the house that was built on the left corner of the lot, but right now, when it rains heavily, the land, because it's down from the mountains, absorbs a huge amount of water, and the water runoff down the center of the proposed lot split right now goes directly down Par Grande.
Mm-hmm.
And as of right this moment, we're 2 weeks or so past the heavy rains, and the water is still running off. My concern is that when the lots are developed, that the water pattern may shift, and not go down Par Grande, but go directly at my house. And so what I would propose as a condition to the lot split is some kind of restriction or conditioning that there are constructed some storm drains, so that the water that is flowing down flow into a storm drain and then ultimately goes through the street system and flows into the ocean. I noticed when I was reading the report that it currently states that the stormwater sheet flows downslope from north to south toward Riven Rock, where it enters a storm drain and it's carried to the Pacific Ocean. That is not exactly true. And as I mentioned to Mr. Briggs, I have taken pictures of the flow of the water coming off the land during this last rainstorm, which I can share with you all if I can figure out how to get out of my computer, but I'm sure I can have someone help me do that. But again, my concern is not so much splitting of the land or building appropriate sized homes on it. It's what happens when the water is diverted. And if there aren't some precautionary actions taken now, the poor person who buys the parcel next August, when there is no water runoff and isn't aware that there is a significant water runoff problem, if they're not put on notice that they're buying the land subject to this problem, they're never going to know about it. And I just think that it's important in terms of disclosure to the future buyer and for protection for my home, that something be put in as a condition on this lot split so that something can be done about the problem. And it's certainly something can be done.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. If there's no one else that wishes to address us on this item, I'm going to close the period for public comment and take it back to the members of the commission for questions of staff or of the applicant, as the case may be. Mr. Briggs, I do have a question for you. And I don't know if you know this, where is the storm drain for this? Is the storm drain in Riven Rock? Is there a storm drain in Riven Rock, or is it surface flow in that area?
Mr. Chair, I believe that there is a storm drain on the southern edge of the property, about halfway, about in the middle of the property. And it's not your typical storm drain that's cut into a gutter. It looks more like a 12-inch pipe just kind of sitting there on the ground. Pat, is that about right? Pat's more familiar with the property than I am.
Right. Okay.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, there is a storm drain on the north side of Riven Rock, and it's approximately west of Para Grande's intersection with it. It then crosses the street at a 90-degree angle to Riven Rock, and then there's another drop inlet on the south side of Riven Rock, and from there I assume it goes to the creek, but the neighbor, I'm sure, can tell.
Mr. Briggs?
I would assume there's no reason why the flow off the property wouldn't continue to be channelized into that drain, collected. I mean, I know under the law you're not allowed to burden your neighbor's property with your increased development, so that's not allowed in any event. But I understand the neighbor's concern, but I'm not sure we need a particular condition that to my guess, would not be outside the realm of the normal conditions we have for our projects in any event.
Mr. Chair, at the time that an applicant comes in for development on one of these parcels in the future, obviously they would look at drainage at that time. The project would go through full Montecito BAR review. The public would have ample opportunity to participate. drainage could be brought up at that time. That would be another option. It's not like if we don't condition the project now that it'll never happen. I think Mr. Bruston is just looking for a little assurance right now.
Yeah, I understand. I guess where I was headed is I don't think we really need to deal with it at this point in the process. 'Cause
I disagree.
You do?
Yeah, so I just have to jump in and say that,
Okay, well, you're allowed to disagree.
Yeah, okay, and
Commissioner
Mr.
Gotzinger, what's
Yeah, well,
what is your
Mr.
position
Briggs,
on this?
could you please put up the one that looks like this? Because I think it's more telling, because you've got, so I really appreciate the neighbor coming forward and bringing this up, because I think that this water, this surface water, this storm water, whatever this water is a problem. It is not entering the storm drain. You can go out there almost any day of the week, which I do because I happen to have 2 clients down Riven Rock. That water runs almost all the way to East Valley on a continuous basis. It is not going into any storm drains. If it doesn't go down Para Grande, coming out of the storm drain and continuing to go down Para Grande, it then goes along the southern edge of the property, and almost any day of the week still visible. You can see it running approximately halfway down Hot Springs Road right now. Yesterday, because I went and checked it again. Monday before these rains. And that water has been running for over 3 weeks. It has been running. And the problem that I have is that if you look at the landforms, which is why I asked you to put up there, the location of the proposed driveway is right where that water is now surfacing and sheeting across the property. So I think we do have a problem here as far as drainage is concerned. That entire area, Para Grande and Hot Springs Road, is very impacted by drainage. I have the 2 clients that I have on Para Grande have spent tremendous amounts of money to manage the water, to keep it on their property, but it's just coming down. And it's continuing to come down. Now, I don't know, I'm not going to say that this piece of property is contributing to all of that water that's coming down, but right now, a significant part of, and I don't see any reference to it in the ND. We've given a and I agree with the public comment that any future buyer, if they're to buy this in the middle of summer, they're not going to, where is this water coming from? Somebody needs to determine that. Is it a high water table that just fills up when it rains? Are the soils really stable in there where the building envelope is? Because that seems to be where the water's coming out of the ground right now. I walked the entire property twice to determine where that water was coming from. So I personally do have a concern that if we're going to create 2 more lots to the benefit of the owner, that the owner be conditioned to deal with the water that now is impacting the people that are living to the south of this piece of property. And you can't get around it, that it impacts it, So that's why I just had to jump in and disagree with you, Mr. Chairman, because I do think it is an impact that hasn't really been looked at. Because from the pictures, those were summertime pictures that you showed us. I don't know when the last time staff was on site, but I think this is a problem.
Commissioner Gotzinger, I don't disagree with you that there's a problem. I just think that the appropriate time for it to be handled is when there's a development proposal for the property. But I'll defer to staff.
We're now locating the driveway and the building envelope right where all the water is.
I'll defer to staff for
Mr.
comment
Chair,
on
one
whether
consideration is that the driveway and building envelope locations that you see here there would be no driveways developed with the project. It's just an easement that would be held until the driveway was constructed. So I think that maybe the future development associated with residences and the drainage improvements that we're talking about could be comprehensively developed at the same time, as opposed to putting a Band-Aid on the drainage problem now and then going and removing the Band-Aid and doing something else additionally later.
I agree with that, but you have located the driveway where the water is right now to avoid the trees. That's why you placed it where it is. Now, as far as I'm concerned, when future development occurs, that driveway is not going to be able to be located there with the amount of water that is sheeting off the property right now. I get that that's my personal opinion and comes from my professional background, but I can't approve a driveway location in that place. It's just not going to, in my opinion, it's not going to work.
Commissioner Gotstinger, if I could comment, I don't think there's any problem putting the driveway in that location, because the location of the driveway and the sheet, how the water is dealt with in the driveway, are two completely separate and distinct issues. You can easily have the water fall on the driveway, be conveyed off to the sides, put into a structure, and taken anywhere else that it needs to be taken. I don't think we're by putting in these particular easements for the building envelopes that we are in any way affecting how the ultimate design of the water detention and direction on the property will be handled. Those are engineering issues.
Mr. Chair,
please.
just a couple of comments. First of all, we might want to hear from the applicant's engineer on this
Probably.
issue. Secondly, staff has drafted a condition that I think would meet the intent of the neighboring property owner, that anybody who bought this property was aware that there was an issue that needed to be dealt with. I don't think that the map is the vehicle to do it. I think Aaron is correct that you would solve this drainage problem with the subsequent development. I don't even think we have a nexus to deal with it until the development occurs. But I do believe if the issue is as significant as several in the room have indicated, that people should know what they're buying when they buy the property, and that would be really the purpose of the condition, not to make sure it's dealt with properly, but really so whoever bought it knew they were buying an issue that
do you have
needed
some
to be dealt
suggested
with.
language?
Yes, I'll let Aaron read that.
Suggested condition reads, the owner shall design and install improvements to reduce surface water runoff from the subject properties onto Ribbon Rock Road. The improvements shall be reviewed and approved by P&D and Building and Safety prior to the issuance of a land use permit for future residential development on parcels 2 and 3. The improvements shall be installed prior to occupancy and maintained for the life of the development.
Thank you. Mr. Yoakum, do you have any comments related to this issue?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I agree with the condition as staff has suggested, and the applicant's willing to accept that condition. And just for the record, that as part of the record for the submittal of the parcel map, that there is a geology report of the site and a soils report of the residence that was built, and both of those reports were negative as to groundwater that's near the surface. And Mr. Adiolo's property is the recipient of surface flow or incidental water coming from the north, just as all properties coming off Montecito and going down Hot Springs or Para Grande, that we acknowledge that there is this need for a condition and also a disclosure to any future buyers to address it properly.
Very well, thank you.
And may I add one thing while I'm here? Is
Please do.
that the Transportation Department letter referenced, it was a typo, Los Alamos planning area, and it should be Montecito. I talked to them yesterday, but I wanted to confirm that the fees are correct for the peak hour trips that are being generated.
Thank you. Did you have any other comments that you wished us to have?
Nope.
Any further presentation?
No, thank you very much for your
Okay.
deliberations.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, at least on my version of the transportation letter, it's Los Alamos is crossed out and
Mhm.
Montecito is written in. So I think you've
I noticed that
got
too.
that.
It's on my version as well. Commissioners, any other questions of staff? Then we'll close the public hearing and I'll put it to the commission for deliberation and action. Commissioner Gotstinger.
Yeah, I just actually, Mr. Briggs, could you read that condition again?
Certainly. The owner shall design and install improvements to reduce surface water runoff from the subject properties onto Riven Rock Road. The improvement shall be reviewed and approved by P&D and Building and Safety prior to issuance of a land use permit for future residential development. The improvement shall be installed prior to occupancy and maintained for the life of the development.
So that actually is saying that prior to the issuance of a land use permit, this drainage issue has to be dealt with.
It shall be
Right.
designed
It
and
shall be
approved,
designed and
and then
approved.
installed prior to occupancy for the residents.
Okay.
So the
I just-
practical effect would be that the drainage improvements would be installed in conjunction with site grading and development.
Okay, yeah, I
And
just
we
wanted
just
to.
confirm
yeah.
it before occupancy were allowed.
Commissioner Phillips.
I'm prepared to move staff's recommendation with one exception, with one additional bit of language. I'd like to take the position that the palms in parcel 2 are specimen trees and that they should be dealt with as we deal with specimen trees. And if we don't have a procedure, I can come up with one.
Mr. Chair, maybe I could make a
If
recommendation.
you would, please.
Prior, which parcel are we talking about? 2, right? So you're not talking about the eucalyptus on parcel 3, just
Just
the
talking the
palm.
palms.
Palms.
Okay, so.
There's 3, there may be 4, I don't know, but I
So.
do.
per-
There's
perhaps-
Queen Anne palms.
Perhaps something like, guaranteed, they will not destroy these trees. Prior to issuance of a grading permit, which would require removal of these trees, the applicant shall submit a plan for relocation or boxing and transportation off-site.
Preservation.
Yeah, something like that.
Great.
Is that good enough?
And
Is that
Director
okay?
Black guarantees that they'll be fine.
Mr.
My
Fell.
husband would take
I
them.
just, I
I'll
couldn't,
take them too.
I couldn't pick up on Diane's words there. Is it clear that they can be boxed and shipped off-site
Yes.
to a
Right.
third site?
Yeah, the idea was to
Okay.
preserve
I've
them.
got a fire in the back of the room.
Okay.
You got a couple up here, too. We're getting in line for them.
Moved as amended, I suppose.
And Mr. Chair, I assume that
And
that
and that
includes
would
the
also include,
drainage.
I am assuming, Mr. Briggs' original
Right.
related to drainage.
So I'll second the Commissioner Phillips' motion with the 2 additional conditions.
Moved and seconded without, unless there's further comments. All in favor, aye. Opposed, no. Aye.
Oh, aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. That concludes item number 3 on our standard agenda. Our next item is the Terzanian demolition, single-family development and accessory structure, item number 4. And we probably need a couple minutes to set up, so we'll take a brief break. Jessica Oplin, you want to read that into the record?
The following is the hearing on the request of James Mayo Macari, agent architect for the owner Nina Tazurian, to consider case number 05 CDH 26, application filed on May 31st, 2005, and to accept the CEQA exemption pursuant to sections 15301 L1 and 15301 L4 and sections 15303A and 15303E of the state guidelines for implementation of the California Environmental Quality Act.
Thank you. Ms. Peugeot.
Yes, thank you. I'll be making the presentation in lieu of Alan Bell. He's on vacation this week.
Okay.
This project is for a demolition and reconstruction of a new house on a property that is an oceanfront property in Montecito. Because of its location on Edge Cliff and the beach, it requires that it be reviewed by your commission before approval. This is the existing lot configuration and the existing structures. There are several existing structures on the property. The structure at the corner on the northern west side will be demolished. It's a pre-existing cottage, at one time I think used as a second residence on the property. That will be demolished, as will the small primary residential dwelling. There's a cabana pre-existing that's actually attached to the seawall on the beachward side, and extends beyond the property line. That cabana is not part of this project description. The applicant is working with the State Lands Committee to determine ownership and jurisdiction of that structure. So that structure is not included. There's several accessory structures, stairways, railings, and things like that that will also be demolished and replaced. This is the project site. I assume that you probably know this. It's a major access point to the beach. This is the Tertian property, and these are some of the views of the specimen pines that frame the entrance into the property. This is the property line in this direction here, and then it goes off to the west. Another view of the property. This is one of the structures that will be removed. This was built without permits, and if you have been to the site, you probably see that many of the structures are old and kind of an eclectic style with many repairs and remodels done over the years. That being said, we did have a historic letter report for the project, and that confirmed that it was not of any historic significance. None of the structures are. This is the view from the beach. This is the site plan for the proposed new structures. There'll be a new single-family residence here of a little over 3,000 square feet, which is approximately 5% over the Montecito FAR guidelines, so primarily matches the guidelines for the size of the property. This will be a new recreation room in place of the older unpermitted second dwelling unit. Here's the cabana. Again, that won't be touched. Elevations of the property. These were seen at Board of Architectural Review a few times for conceptual review and got positive comments for the architecture. Board of Architectural Review also asked story poles to be erected. They were, and the Montecito Board of Architectural Review made comments in their conceptual motions saying that they did not believe that the height or the locations of the structures would intrude upon views from the beach or views to the mountains from the beach. These are floor plans, and these are some of the topics that we reviewed on our planning analysis. There are some specimen trees. Two of them frame the entrance to the beach access. Those first two large trees, maybe I should go back and show those to you. I'm inept at this. Do it.
Just come up on the keyboard.
On the keyboard, the arrow.
Now you're on that, so.
Okay.
You gotta get out of there.
Get out of that. Okay.
Just hit page up.
Page up. Okay, great. There are 3 trees in this location. The first 2 and the larger ones will be retained with the tree protection plan. And then there is a third one just a few feet behind this second tree that will need to be removed because it's within the footprint of the recreation room. The structures conform to the new height regulations under the coastal zone. And they do not affect the coastal access, either the vertical or lateral access that exists in front of the seawall. These are some of the Board of Architectural Review comments, basically all positive comments for the design. We found the project exempt from environmental review. both the demolition and the new structures. And we recommend that you adopt the required findings, accept the CEQA exemption, and approve the project subject to conditions.
Thank you for your presentation. Commissioners, maybe we can start with site visits and ex parte. Commissioner Phillips.
No ex parte communication, but I did visit the site.
Commissioner Gottsinger.
Yeah, no ex parte, and I have visited the site, and I probably should mention that when this project first came in, I think I was still the chair of MBAR. You know, from what I can tell from the elevations, it's been significantly altered since that time. So, you know, but I think I should declare that.
Right. I visited the site and no ex parte communications. Commissioner Phillips, you have your light on.
Ms. Pujol, did you mention there were story poles erected?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, yes, there were story poles erected during the Board of Architectural Review conceptual review of the project.
You know, it helps so much if we get notice that those are up. You know, it's so difficult to rely on someone's sense of what's blocking views, and it really is critical for me. I don't know how you guys feel.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, story poles were erected during conceptual review. Conceptual review, however, did take place several months or maybe even more than a year ago, so long before it was prepared and scheduled for Planning Commission. So in light of that, I'm not sure if your request is for noticing on story poles at that time, even if it's early in the process. Is that what you're requesting?
Well, on a coastal zone issue, we're definitely seeing it, so it isn't like it's maybe not. So, yeah, we need to hear those.
You know, we do get those agendas, but I must admit, I don't always notice, don't always go through the agendas for the MBAR. So it would be nice on the ones that are definitely going to come to us that we make sure we flag those if there's some mechanism that you can think of to do so.
Mr. Chair, we'll try and work that out.
Is there
We'll figure out
a
way.
reason? Is there a reason on this particular item that we're not seeing the architectural elevations of the project?
You actually did see them. June put them.
No,
up.
no, I meant in our packet.
This is all we got in our packet.
I'm sorry, I apologize for that. It was probably an effort to get the items to you and everything else done before a pending vacation. But I do have a full set of plans that I can pass along to you if you'd like to see them now. I can bring them up to you.
Yeah, we saw the comments there when you put them on the screen, but it's really much preferable when I visit the site to be able to have the plans in hand so I can put it in context with the site, and it's much more difficult to transpose that here. Commissioner Gottsinger.
Yes, I would. Could Ms. Pujol, could you go back to the slide of from the beachfront? I think I looked down to read something. Okay, fine. You kind of went by really fast, and I wanted to see if I could determine what trees we're looking at from this slide. So the two large pines, that one and the one next to it, those are proposed to be left on site. And then it's that little short scrubby one that's coming out. Oh,
Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Gottsinger, there are actually 3 trees in this location. I think you might be seeing just the edge of one from this side behind the palm. The applicant may be able to help us out there. And these 2 pines are very close together, and I believe this one closest to the ocean is the one that is proposed for removal. So the 2 larger pines will remain, and the applicant will be planting a couple of new pines somewhat further away than this one, which the arborist reported was very close to that tree. And so I think in the end what you will see is a little bit less density in the foliage when this one tree is removed, but you will still see these sort of signature tall trees framing the entrance to the accessway to the beach. This is I believe this is the dead pine that's going to be removed. it looks dead.
Commissioner Phillips.
Ms. Pujol, only one of those two trees is coming down? Is that what you did?
There are
of
actually
three.
3 trees here. One that is pretty masked in this photo. You can see it better from the photo going in the
So-
other direction. Okay, if you look closely here, this one remains, and that's the largest one.
Uh-huh.
And that's the one that frames the entrance, along with the tree on the property adjacent to it on the other side of the access point. And then there's 2 trees here. You can
Two
see 2
there.
trunks. They're of similar size. The one closest to the ocean will be removed. The other one will be remained. It'll probably, open up a little bit once this tree is removed because they're so close together. I'm not sure the distance, but I know they're pretty close together. And so this one will be removed. These 2 will be protected by a tree protection plan.
There must be a setback from that fence, and it looks like it's within a setback area. I wonder why it's coming down. Any idea? You couldn't build that close to the fence. They're back further?
Yeah, we're not ready for you, but we'll let you present in a few minutes.
I don't think I have a PowerPoint slide of the plan view of the trees and landscaping, but it may be that the trunk leans in a direction and
Yeah, Ms. Pujol, I'll ask the applicant.
Yeah, maybe we're at the stage where we ought to go ahead and have the applicant make their presentation, because it seems
Well,
like we're
it's
getting
not
into
shown
some
very well
details
here.
staff may not have access to all of the material.
Mr. Chair and members of the commission, I'm James McCary, the architect. I'm here with the owner, Mrs. Terzian, and her counsel, Chris Jacobs. This kind of confusing as to the
Microphone. Thank you.
It's on, just make sure you speak into it.
Okay. All right. As you can see on the site plan indicating there, the picture doesn't do it quite justice. Also, there's a fall off with it. The property line bears around to the west. So if I can go up there, I'll indicate where they are.
We can give you a point. There it is.
Okay. All right. The big tree that's going to remain is this one that you see, which is kind of like, as they say, the canopy to this to the access way down to the beach. The one that's going to be removed is kind of sitting right there, which kind of is deceptive by the photograph you saw. The one that's going to be remain is the one that sits right here. So these two being close together indicates the difference in the photograph. As far as the setbacks, as you can see, the actual property line jogs like that, so that this one that's going to be removed is outside the actual setback line.
Do you have a presentation you're going to make to us, or are you
Other
just
than-
here to answer questions
Yeah, just
today?
answer questions. The staff has already been very conclusive.
Commissioners, any other questions? Could you outline the jog in the property line?
Yes. Yes, sir. It comes down here, rolls over, and then goes down.
And the seawall is set back from that property line. Is
Right.
that,
The
is that
seawall
correct?
was done here.
And it looks like it then goes back. So the actual property line is forward of the seawall. Is that what it is?
Yes, this is the property line right there. And the outside one is the actual seawall.
And would you mind addressing the issue of the accessory structure and what's going on with the cabana? I know it's outside but just to understand the whole project, if you could.
Right. The cabanas were permitted in 1946 in their existing locations without a seawall condition at that time. Somewhere in the late 80s, the seawall was permitted and put in at this location, which was at the property line, at the building line of the existing cabanas. And somewhere, because of the high water mark and high tide lines and so forth, the property lines have been reestablished. Before, when this was built, of course the property lines went to the ocean, and since then, since the Coastal Commission and shoreline management to reestablish by tides. This is where the property line has been reestablished graphically. We have requested from the State Land Commission to rule on this, because in '95 the County of Santa Barbara issued a permit to repair the seawall, which kind of took on a position of not ownership but a position of jurisdiction, and so there's kind of a conflict as to where the jurisdiction starts and stops. And so what we've requested from the state is either give this jurisdiction to the county, which they've already acted on in the 80s and the 90s, or lease us, create a lease for us to remain and own and continue the ownership of the seawall and maintenance of the seawall. So that's where that's at.
That's where that one's at. Okay, thank you. If there's no other questions of the applicant, I'm going to open this for public comment. And I do have one speaker slip here, Kathleen Wenheimer. And if there's anyone else that wishes to address us, now would be the time to submit a speaker slip to us.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. My name is Kathleen Weinheimer. I represent William and Marcia Wayne, owners of the property adjacent to the applicant's project on Bonnie Mead. We have been working closely with the applicant, her counsel, and her architect in the design of the project, and are particularly appreciative of the spacing of the two buildings, leaving a view corridor for my client and avoiding a densely developed frontage along Edgecliff that would, we believe, seriously change the character of that neighborhood.
I've seen your letter. Could you locate your clients approximately where the house is?
We're right about there.
Okay, thank you. That was my assumption as to which one it was. Thank you.
And with that, I'm available for questions, but just wanted to support the application in its present form.
In its present form?
Yes.
Because you do have there was a letter and there was an issue related to the height of the hedge. Has that been resolved to your satisfaction?
We've resolved that to our satisfaction.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We don't have any other speaker slips. And if nobody else wishes to address us, I'm going to close the period for public comment. So it's back to Planning Commission staff if you have any additional. Looks like we have Commissioner Gottsanger, you have a question?
Yes, now I'm going to go back to this trees. We've got two that are staying, one that's going. We've got a mitigation measure, I do believe that we're going to, we have to do some tree replacement for that one. Okay, is that accurate?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner
I see
Gosdenker,
that-
actually there's more than one tree that's being removed, but the other trees are palms and not considered skyline trees. So the one skyline palm that's being removed will have a condition to replace with two other, I think there's 36-inch box trees in a nearby but not identical location. And there'll be
Of
a
the
tree.
palms, but no, where's
No, for the removal of the 30-inch pine.
It's condition 18, if you go to the conditions of approval. It's, I think what
condition
Ms.
8. Okay.
18.
18. Okay, I think that's where I'm reading.
Yes, it indicates that the applicant shall plant two 36-inch box to replace the one Monterey pine tree that's being removed. And then the condition 20 protects the other two pines.
Okay, so I am getting this. Okay, so far on the landscape plan as submitted, that has not been. There's no trees in the landscape plan to replace these.
No, that's not a final landscape plan. They'll do some additional work on it before they go back to BAR for final approval.
Okay, so you'll make sure that those get located somewhere where
We
it's.
certainly will.
Yeah, because they're kind of inconsistent with the palette of plantings. So that's my only concern. I mean, it's a very tropical planting, which is probably appropriate where it is. So it's going to be kind of difficult to locate those pines inside, this plant palette.
Any other questions of staff? Then we'll close the public hearing. It's,
I do have, I just want to make sure, just one thing.
Please,
I
Commissioner
I
Gassano.
noticed that we did address construction traffic, and there's no okay. Those conditions will be forwarded to MBAR so that they're clear about that, about where
Mr.
construction.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, we certainly could do that. I know that construction parking is a topic that does come up during the course of their meeting, so we can advise them of those conditions. There's construction parking and washout area conditions in the conditions of approval.
Yeah, I mean, it's just particularly
Yes.
crunchy right now, and I would imagine it's going to get even more crunchy in that area in
Okay, we'd be glad to do that.
not too distant future.
That's a good comment. That's a really constrained location with the beach access. Commissioner Phillips.
Ms. Peugeot, do you have a photo or a sketch of an elevation from the beach? And I'm concerned about whether this is impacting mountain views.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, we,
story
of course, did through the conceptual Montecito BAR and the story pole review, asked Montecito BAR to look at potential effects. I do have an elevation. Did you? Oh. That's possible. We actually have a photo there.
So,
But it doesn't, yeah, that's the existing house. So at least from this angle, you actually don't get too much of the mountain view. But Board of Architectural Review did visit the site, and one of their comments was that it would not affect
yeah, I saw that.
the views.
Okay, thanks.
So it just, just going back to this story pole issue, it would have also been helpful if photographs had been taken when the story poles were up. In lieu of us being able to see them, we took pictures, we could have taken them when the story poles were up.
Yeah, I think especially for any of these projects that are taken from the beach, because we're charged with protecting
Right.
scenic views from these public areas.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, one of the committees that your chair serves on is this Joint Chairs Committee. It's all of the chairs of the 4 BARs, the County Planning Commission, and the chair of the HLAC, the Historic Landmarks Advisory Commission. And one of the things that the central BAR, a couple of central BAR members have been working on are story pole guidelines.
Yes.
And I think that there will be an opportunity in those guidelines, and we can certainly do it before they're formalized, but to address not only how you install story poles and when you install story poles, but when you install story poles, photographing those, and we've had requests in the past to do that, and also informing the Planning Commission. So we'll make sure that we come up with a comprehensive package, and I'm hopeful that we will have this issue addressed in, I think our next meeting is
We were going to do it in our next
May.
meeting, which is in May 10th, May 8th,
So I
somewhere
will
in there.
encourage us to continue to follow through on that.
I know
But
we got
in the
close to
meantime-
having that this time, but
Right.
it's a good thought. We'll include that and make sure
And
it's
in the meantime, we'll do everything we can to make sure that you know about story poles being erected on projects that you might see.
okay. Thank you. Commissioners, if there's no other questions, or are there other questions, I guess? So I guess we're ready for a motion, if one of you wishes to proceed.
Mr. Chair, I can move to adopt staff's recommendation.
I'll second that. It's been moved and seconded to adopt the staff's recommendation. All in favor say aye, opposed no. Aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. So we are on to item number 5, the Biltmore Hotel change of conditions item. Do you need time to set up on this item? Just a minute, okay, so we'll stay in session. Actually, we'll just take a minute break in case anybody needs it. Biltmore Hotel change in conditions. Ms. Oplin, you want to read this into the record for us?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is a hearing on the request of Steve Walton, AICP Susan Elledge Planning and Permitting Services, agent for the owner, to consider case number 07-AMD11, application filed on September 12, 2007, and accept the addendum to Environmental Impact Report 04 EIR 6 pursuant to the state guidelines for implementation of the California Environmental Quality Act.
Thank you very much. So, Ms. Bridley, are you going to make our presentation today?
Ms. Bridley,
Bridley.
Mr. Chair, thank you.
God,
very much. How could you
I'm
make
so
such a
bad.
mistake?
Where did that come from? After all, I'm really struggling
all
today.
those
I
years,
must say.
Bob. Okay, yes, for the record,
Well, you
I'm
can
Lo-
kick me in the shins
That's
later.
Okay. For the record, I'm Laura Bradley. I'm the contract case planner on this item, and this is a fairly simple case. We've had very little public comment so far. It's a request by the Time Warner Resorts and Hotels to change some conditions in the development plan that is for the hotel spa and some other conditions regarding reservations for the rooms for conference and group use. As you may be familiar with it, the Biltmores are located at 1260 Channel Drive. It is in the geographic appeals area of the coastal zone. I cannot take credit for this gorgeous picture. It's off their website, but this is the completed spa. And the areas of the spa use for public is controlled by Condition 6. Also, spa appointment limits are something that they're wishing to change, and that's Condition 7. I'm sorry. There's two items that you're looking at today. One is a change in conditions. The other one is their compliance report regarding the operation of the spa for its first year. With their compliance function, filed in September 07, they showed that in 2005, there was an exceedance of the daily limits of spa use on 3 days. And then in 2006, it was 3 days during the low season, which is the summer months, and 15 days during the high season, which is the winter months. No, you know what, that's wrong. I'm saying it's the reverse. The low season means it's the non-popular season, the winter months, and the high season is the summer months. And that's called out in Condition 6. Exceeded the limits in 2006 on 3 days in the low season and 15 days in the high season. And in 2007, it exceeded the limits on 15 days during the high season and 45 during the low season. The applicant, I don't know, is going to make a presentation, but what they are telling me is that part of this is because the Coral Casino members were using the Biltmore Spa. Part of this was just getting the whole spa and reservation function going in tandem, and they have some explanations about why that's happened. It's actually gotten much better in the last part of 2007. Their request today is to delete condition number 4, and that's related to conference room hotel booking, and also to modify condition 6 such that the Coral Casino members could use the spa as would overnight hotel guests. And also to modify condition number 8, which is to delete the first year report, which is today's current report, from that condition, and also to address the Coral Casino member use of the spa. The staff analysis was fairly simple. We prepared a CEQA addendum 15164, and we found that it would not negatively affect any of the issue areas in the EIR prepared for the Coral Casino Rehabilitation Project, which included the Biltmore Development Plan as part of that. Public Works Department reviewed the traffic study filed with the application and found no adverse effects and believed that it would not impact any traffic patterns, impacts, changes at all in this neighborhood. And there are no new conditions required as a result of this request. So staff recommends that you receive and file the compliance report. You approve the addendum to 04 EIR 00000006 in Attachment A pursuant to CEQA Guidelines 15164, that you adopt the required findings of approval for the project specified in Attachment B, and that you approve the project subject to conditions in Attachment C. Pretty picture. Available to answer questions.
Would you mind addressing the traffic report issue, just what was done in terms of this particular analysis of this change in condition?
Sure. The application is to allow the Coral Casino members to use the spa without a restriction at the 25 or 15 max per day, depending on the season. And the analysis showed that the Coral Casino members had been able to get spa services, massage services at the Coral Casino before it was closed for rehabilitation. It also found that it also actually went back to the original application that was before your commission for opening the spa for the public on a limited basis. And at that time, the traffic analysis prepared by Associated Transportation Engineers found that it actually assumed that everybody going to the spa would be from outside the area. There was no internal trip. There was no link trip credit as part of that analysis in 2004. So based on that, the request to take the members out of that 25 and 15 person cap would have no change from what was approved in 2004. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So that's what their letter report concluded, and that's what Public Works reviewed and concurred with.
No impact.
Right.
Yeah, understood. Thank you. Any other questions of staff? Let's see. We probably should address the issue of site visits and ex parte. Commissioner?
I probably walk by that site every day or every other day, but I have had no ex parte communication.
Commissioner Gottsdinger?
No ex parte, and I did not recently visit the site inside this. I mean, I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't.
I did not go to the spa.
Yeah,
For the
I mean,
record.
me neither.
No ex parte, but we're all very familiar with the, we've been there many times. If there's no more presentation by staff, then we're ready for the applicant, if you wish to make a presentation on
Just
this
one
item.
quick question, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
Ms. Bradley, the overage on the historical use, any record of whether those visitors generated traffic or were they on-site guests? Do we know who they were?
Well, the summary of the overages were for people that were not overnight hotel guests, because overnight hotel guests can use the spa unrestricted. So there was no associated information related to whether these people came from a mile away or 10 miles away. That wasn't provided as part of the report.
So with traffic projections, we won't really know that either. Or will they assume they're driving there, or will they assume they're walking?
Right, that was my point with the 2004 analysis, which was before your commission when they wanted to open the spa to the public, that their assumption was that everybody using that spa was coming from outside the immediate area.
Right.
And at that point, there were no traffic impacts, and today they concluded the same result. Partially because whether it's 15 or 25 a day, when you spread those out over peak hours or during the day, it doesn't amount to a significant change in level of service in that area of roadways.
And if you're assuming that they are driving to the spa necessarily, then the impact is less than we think, because indeed someone's walking there in the neighborhood, non-hotel guest, possibly.
Quite possibly, we don't have that information.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. We're ready. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Steve Welton. I'm the agent for the applicants, Taiwaner Hotels and Resorts. With me today, I've got Greg Rice, Bill Medell, and our traffic engineer, Scott Shell, if you have any questions for any of them at any point. We don't have a formal presentation. We concur with Laura's presentation. We just wanted to address one issue, which is on the compliance reports, and what you've asked about. And two things on that. One is the hotel does believe that they're actually in compliance, and the information that our traffic engineer supplied, and it's in your staff report, we used 7-day averaging in our analysis, which is, according to Scott, very commonplace in Montecito. And when you look at the report, our 7-day averages are all under the low season and high season numbers. And secondly, the numbers in interviewing Victoria Dolan, unfortunately she's not here today, she was here this morning but wasn't able to be here this afternoon. And talking with her about the numbers that we presented in the compliance report, there's been probably a couple errors in the way it was reported, because at the time the staff was counting treatments the same as visits. So if someone came in for 2 or 3 treatments, they would tally each of those as they came in rather than just counting it as one visit. They're not really understanding the condition very well, unfortunately. So it was, and because of their staff turnover, continually training of the staff, it has to occur. So that has caused some of the numbers probably to be a little bit higher than they actually are. And I think one number in September was inverted where it shows, I think, 40 members of the public and only 12 members of the hotel using the spa on that given day. Because there's, it's not absolutely clear in the condition about how the numbers should be evaluated, we're proposing to add a little additional language to the condition. I was going to provide this to Laura, maybe to put on the overhead. And it's basically just to clarify how the counting takes place, and it asks that, I'll just wait for this slide to come up.
Yeah, we're going to have, thank you.
Just the last 6 words is what we're asking to include in the condition, and we apologize for the late nature of the request. Unfortunately, it was, when we looked at this, it was a lot of our team's understanding that's how you do count trips, but and then talking with staff, that's not their understanding, and so we want to get it clarified for the future in our reporting, make sure that's accurate, and we would like it to use this averaging technique. We do have Scott Shell again from ATE if you'd like to discuss.
If I can ask, the current method is to treat every day as an individual day. Is that correct?
Yeah, we reported
and you're suggesting it be averaged over 7?
Yes.
Okay.
It's reported both ways in our compliance report, so you have the information in each format.
In your other comments, I assume you've changed your methods of recording so that in the future we'll have a little more confidence that the data is the data.
Yes, approximately July or so is when we met with Victoria at that point and explained what we're going through, and she corrected it at that point, which I think is why the compliance reports are much better.
Have gotten better in the interim.
Since then, yeah.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioners, questions of the applicant? We do have a number of comment slips here. And so I'm going to open us to the public comment period. I've got 4 slips, and it looks like 3 are in favor and 1 I'm not sure of. So I'll do the one not sure first, which is Gary Becker. He's on his way.
He's here.
We're ready for you.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Gary Becker, and I'm a resident of Bonnie Mead Shores. My wife and I moved there in part because of the wonderful amenities that we knew were right around the corner at the Four Seasons Biltmore Hotel. So we were frankly disappointed after we located there to find that when we wanted to walk around the corner and get a massage or some other kind of treatment, that we had to be early in the week, or we had to be, some limitation. Those services would not be available from time to time to us. So we're applying now for membership in the Coral Casino, and we're hopeful that if we get in there, you'll find favor with this request so that we won't have to use the gasoline and pollute the air and et cetera in order to drive somewhere else to some other facility that doesn't have a limitation like that. I'd really appreciate your favorable consideration of this.
Thank you, Mr. Becker. Chad Chase.
He's not here.
Not here. Bob Hazard. And the last one is John McGowan.
My name is Bob Hazard, and I spent 25 years as CEO of two of the largest hotel chains in the world, and I'm also a resident of Bonnie Mead along with Gary Becker. The business community gets very nervous when conditions are placed on one business and not on its competitors, as rivals in the same business. And you get nervous because that's beginning to look like a violation of the 14th Amendment, which calls for equal rights for property owners. So you have three restrictions here that I think you enlightened people, the small but enlightened group of commissioners here, needs to take very seriously. One is, of course, the restriction on the spa usage, which Gary talked about. And if you recall, that restriction on traffic made a lot of sense at the time it was imposed when, if you recall, you remember Channel Drive, there was a ban on alcohol that was lifted on East Beach. And so all the teenage drinkers came over to Butterfly Beach. And for 2 summers, it was a nightmare of traffic and congestion and no parking places and boom boxes and everything. Then the community imposed an alcohol restriction on Butterfly Beach. And if you go there today, the traffic problems have virtually disappeared. And so has the parking. So, and in addition to, the Biltmore has added a whole lot more valet parking, and so that's reduced congestion. But I think they're asking for only a removal of the Carl Casino member restriction. But I agree with Gary. I mean, I walk over there and do use the spa, and so if you only take the step of saying we're going to put in motion something that allows the Carl Casino members to use the spa, I feel left out because as a resident who walks there all the time, I mean, hey, what about me? Now, I can pay $70,000 now and join the Carl Casino, but that's sort of a very expensive alternative. And I think if you look at this thing in principle, if MPC suddenly said, hey, look, we're going to tell the Upper Village Montecito service station that they can only service 10 cars a day, but the 2 Coast Village service stations can service an unlimited amount, that's a serious problem because that's a competitive disadvantage. Or suppose you said, hey, Lucky's can only can feed as many diners at once, but across the street, Los Arroyos can only service 25. And that becomes relevant because we're beginning to take a look at the Miramar. And are you going to impose these same kind of restrictions on the Miramar? So I would say to you, get rid of this whole restriction entirely because the situation is entirely different than it was a couple of years ago. The second restriction, the one that limits the Biltmore to selling only 100 rooms on weekends and 150 rooms to groups, is unprecedented in the lodging business. Group business clearly generates less traffic, less parking, more efficient airport transfers. And for the Biltmore, high-end weddings, conferences, special events like the Santa Barbara Film Festival, that's the bread and butter of their business.
Mr. Hazard, if I could interrupt you, we're really short of time. We're going to lose our quorum here in a few minutes, so I'd really appreciate if you could wrap it up.
I would like you to do that, and the third thing, I'd like you to remove that one completely too. And the third one that I think you should look at some future date is this requirement to store the Carl Casino parts in the basement of the Biltmore for 100 years, which is another thing. They didn't ask for that, but I'm going to come back and talk to you about that later on. And so that one should be looked at. I mean, 100 years is, you're all going to be 100, and Clara will only be 140 years old, but the rest of you will be 160 years old. So I would ask you to take a look at that too.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. McGowan.
Mr. Chair and fellow commissioners, my name is John McGowan. I'm here to talk in behalf of the members of the Coral Casino. I've been a member for many years. I serve on the board, and I will be quite brief. We intentionally did not ask a lot of people to come down because we respect your fine time. And the message is that since we no longer have any spa facilities at the Coral Casino, we would like to be able to walk across the street, not drive across the street, and use the facilities that would be available. That would be our request, and I think I speak for most of the membership. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have any more speaker slips, so I'm going to close the period for public comment. And 12:30, yeah. Yeah. So I'll put it back to, I assume staff doesn't have any additional comments, so we probably have some questions of you. I have a question. I'll start out with what would be the impact of using the 7-day averaging? Do you have a position on that?
Staff hasn't looked at it that carefully, but I think this would be consistent with the way county's done
Has done
reporting
other
on other
ones.
things, and I don't think it would be an
You don't
impact
see
in
any
terms of, no.
problem in doing so?
No, not at all.
Commissioner Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There was a suggestion that we had placed restrictions on Coral Casino members. Technically, that's not correct. What we're doing today, or being asked to do, is to put the Coral Casino members in the status of the hotel guests. Coral Casino members could always use the spa as the public. So there was no restriction, but we're enhancing that definition of users who will not be counted. Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Commissioner Gotstinger, did you have any questions? No. Then I'm going to close the public hearing and put it to the commissioners for deliberation and a motion.
Mr. Chair, just discussion at this
Yes,
point. The only
please.
concern I have, we all wanted the spa to happen, and I'm glad it's going well and popular. The only concern I have is I would guess that the public is not going to get to use this any longer. You're probably near a maximum now. And with hotel guests and Coral Casino guests, the non-member, non-entitled public is, and that may be fine. I mean, that may be the way it is, and I suppose if you signed up a year in advance, you can find a spot eventually. But I wonder given that we argued for the public to use it, are we concerned if they no longer can, or should we be concerned?
I think you're misconstruing, but I'll let staff address your comments.
I'm assuming that you're going to get more crowded, and
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Phillips, I think the effect of the request today would be to put the Coral Casino members into the category of hotel guests, which are not counted, against the public visitors. So actually, you would be allowing for
it'll
more
free up spaces.
public visitors, not less.
no, the public visitors will be booked after the hotel guests and the Coral Casino guests, just as they are booked in after your hotel guests.
You're speaking of the capacity of the spa to handle the guests.
Yeah,
Right. I see.
you're assuming there's space. I'm assuming there isn't going to be any, but.
Well, you need to be on the record, Greg, if you're going to speak.
Mr. Rice, if you could, we can't hear you.
Okay, I can speak to that. The reason why we're coming in is because we do have capacity, but we can't get the customers in because we're limited by the condition.
Mm-hmm.
So by raising the condition, or changing the condition, I should say, that will allow us to bring in more customers.
Right.
The 7-day averaging clarification would help actually probably the most because of the nature of the business. When the hotel is full, then we don't have capacity on certain days, but we're, obviously have no traffic those days either. So to average it over 7 days would help a lot.
It makes sense. Thank you. I'm ready for a motion unless there's further questions or deliberation.
Okay, so I will make a motion to accept staff's findings on the addendums to the conditions for the Biltmore. Yeah, so that's my motion. I do, in fact, yeah, you need to put more?
No, I was just going to help you.
Oh, got it.
You can just move staff's recommendation with a change to conditions unless there's something else you wanted to add.
No, that's it, that's what I was
And-
intending. Oh, I said findings instead of,
Yes,
okay.
you did.
I apologize.
And,
I
and
used
you
the
did,
wrong-
you did mean to include the 7-day averaging in that.
Yes, I absolutely did mean to include the 7-day averaging on that, you know. So that's my motion.
Good.
Then my comment is that I really do agree with both Mr. Hazard, and I'm sorry I forgot the other public comment, you know, and would support some, you know, Bonnie Mead, because there really isn't a traffic impact from Bonnie Mead. What you're saying, you just want to walk across the street, is that sometime you guys start negotiating with the Biltmore such that we could actually in some way accommodate Bonnie Mead people to be able to use the spa and not be
You mean walking traffic in general?
walking traffic in walking, you know.
We would be fine with adding Bonnie Mead as another exclusion.
Yeah, I just don't know that staff would be fine without having to really look at that, you know, just to look at all the impacts of what's being proposed. That's why I was sort of suggesting that we bring it back at a different time. You know, obviously, you're going to be coming back whenever you're required to come back, you know. And it's sort of an ongoing, evolving process here. You know, so I just see that, you know, maybe 6 months you'll have to come back for some compliance report or something. And so I'm just suggesting you kind of start looking at that. Because I really do get that all of this was based on the traffic impacts. At least for me, that was what at the time that all of this was conditioned, that's what we were dealing with, you know, besides a lot of other things, you know. So, you know, and I also in my comments, I just wanted to say I do appreciate Mr. Hazard's comments under equal protection under the law, given that we do have another major hotel coming online. We all know we've got the Miramar, you know, and I do, I personally think the Miramar and the Biltmore should be treated equally, you know. So, and we have not set the conditions on the Miramar yet. In fact, we've only heard it at conceptual, so we haven't even started down that road yet. But I really appreciate you bringing that forward to the commission, so that we really are looking at how to be, you know, fair to both hoteliers, I guess is the way you say it.
92 conditions, remember that number.
I won't forget it. I really won't. And who's to say how many of the conditions the Miramar will have when we finally get done with it?
Mr. Chair and members of the commission, just
Yes,
as a
thank
short
you.
comment, you know, each project is unique.
Stands on its own.
You know, is the conditioning is addressed in the context of its unique setting and issues. So we'll be doing that when you look at the Miramar and look at this in its own context.
I appreciate your comments, Mr. Allen, because you know, fortunately or unfortunately, every place is different. But I understand the sentiment to not treat the same people differently. Let's put it that way. Let's see. We have a motion.
Have we been moved to adopt? I can second.
Okay, so we have a motion and second. And before we vote, I'll just make the comment that I think what we're seeing here is we have had, you know, we've dealt with the Biltmore and this issue of the spa over a number of years now, and it doesn't appear that it's presenting a problem. So I think these kind of modifications are you know, a good idea for us, and hopefully this condition these will improve your operational abilities without impacting the community, which I think they probably will. So good luck with it. Anyway, motion and second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. We have one last item on our agenda, and we have about 20 minutes left. So we are almost ahead of schedule. We'll take a break for a minute here so you have time to set up. Workshop on shifting permit review for certain applications. Ms. Oakland, you want to?
Thank you, Mr.
I'm
Chair.
not sure if we read this into the record. It's not a
Yes.
public hearing, is it?
We
Oh,
do.
you still do? Okay.
The following is the hearing on the request of the Planning and Development Department that the Montecito Planning Commission review and give direction on proposed revisions to Chapter 35.460, road naming and address numbering, and Chapter 35.474, post-approval procedures of Section 35-2, the Santa Barbara County Montecito Land Use and Development Code of Chapter 35, zoning of the county code relating to shifting permit reviews for certain applications.
Thank you. Director Black, you're going to make this?
Mr. Chair, actually, I'm going to have Ms. Saley make the staff presentation. I think this is a pretty simple matter. I would be shocked if we were here until 12:30 discussing it. There are just two issues that we wanted to discuss with the commission, and then we'll be bringing back ordinance language if you concur. And so I'll ask Pat to
Right. Thank you.
explain it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Two things we'd like to discuss today. These both relate to items that by law require noticed public hearings, and we're not proposing to change that, just the means that we might go about that we would like to discuss changing. This, first of all, road naming, which tends to not be too controversial. There are guidelines that exist in terms of the names that can be applied to a new road. Sometimes renaming applications have been controversial in various communities. We recognize that. And then the other issue relates to time extensions, which for the most part are pretty straightforward. There's financing issues. People, as long as they're diligently pursuing implementing their approval, for the most part, those are approved pretty easily. In both cases, these are appealable actions. The current process for naming a road or renaming a road is notice to all owners and tenants, posted notices. They're typically reviewed by the zoning administrator if they're a standalone request, and appeals are possible to the Planning Commission and then the board. Ideally, application to name a new street accompanies whatever discretionary application, a new subdivision. All the roads are named. Then if there is an issue with a road name, it's handled with that application. And where an application follows a tentative map, again, this is not encouraged currently, but it does happen sometimes. The director approves, although that is appealable also. So what we'd like to do, you might recall the waived hearing process that exists now for certain coastal applications. And what that entails is the required notice per law. And in the notice it says that the director intends to approve this particular application unless there is a request for a public hearing. So if you're one of the neighbors 300 feet or whatever may be required, and you do have an issue with the road naming or renaming, all you need to do, and the same applies to the the time extensions, all you need to do is request that a hearing be held. A hearing is scheduled, a new notice is sent, and the process works itself out, whether there's an appeal or not, notwithstanding. So we are proposing that for any road naming project, first of all, if there's a discretionary application, we're proposing that it be required that the two be tied together. It just is much more efficient. I think everyone agrees. But if that's not the case, we're proposing that the notice be the waived hearing approach. If someone has an issue with it, they can ask for the hearing, new notice is sent. If there is no request for hearing, it's a much abbreviated, smoother process. Appeals could still be filed, although ideally that would not occur. For time extensions, there have been, over the last 7 years, 50 of them, 3 approved by your commission. Majority or not majority, most tentative maps, CUPs, and you can see the other kinds. By law, any time extension has to have the same legal notice as the original discretionary application. We are again proposing the waived hearing approach. Same notice, but the notice would state, if you don't have an issue with this, you need do nothing, but if you do have an issue, you can request the hearing. It's a pretty good way to make sure if there is an issue, it will get aired. If there isn't an issue, we've made the process shorter. So we are looking for your input today on this proposal to use the waived hearing process for both time extensions, road namings, and renamings. And just for your information, the County Planning Commission last month reviewed these proposals in a workshop. They agreed this was a good idea. Just in the interest of being complete, we also talked to them about conditional use permits for septic systems. It's not applicable to your commission because there are no special problem areas, right? Yeah, in Montecito for septic. And then we also talked to them about changing the Government Code Section 65402, which requires review by the local planning agency for projects. It's CIPs, lots of things that are proposed by various agencies. And after a long discussion, the County Planning Commission was not interested in changing the existing procedure. And one of our overarching goals in doing the process improvement projects is to standardize. So because the Planning Commission wasn't interested in changing that, we don't want to suggest a change in Montecito because that's not simplifying and standardizing. So that, as far as staff is concerned, is pretty much off the table. So would be happy to take any questions. This is the procedure from here on out. We have input from the County Planning Commission. I just ran through that. Like to hear what your commission has to say. We would draft language and tentatively come back in about a month to you to see the ordinance language and then go to the County Planning Commission and on to the board. So that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Commissioner Phillips, I think you won the.
It's hard to beat me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm certainly in support of streamlined process and more efficient government, but I am ingrainedly suspicious of diminished due process. Would this, if you want to have a hearing, you can be in bold type. Can it be readable? Can you make sure it's not hidden? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I think it works, and Commissioner Phillips, I think it works quite well for our coastal development permit with a hearing process where we do offer a waived hearing process. And if anybody requests a hearing, first the applicant has to say, yeah, this is something we want to try and waive. And then if it is, we send a notice out. And if anybody requests a hearing for whatever reason, we conduct a hearing.
So it's any request?
Any request would result in a hearing.
Okay. Commissioner Gottsanger?
Yeah, what I was going to say is I have no problem with the road naming part at all. I'm just like, what do I want to sit here and name roads for? The only thing that I'd like to know what goes into this time extension thing. Like if we were to do this, what gets looked at? And where I'm looking from, just so you understand, is that we consistently hear in Montecito from the community that why do these projects go on so long? Why do, it's like, and then we deal with this cluster construction, the cluster construction traffic, which is not really looked at, and nor is it mitigated because it's temporary traffic and all of that. So for me, I'm hard pressed to kind of just let this be signed off by someone who really is not present to the impacts in the community. Like we're going to go, okay, well, we'll just let this keep running,
So, Mr. Chair, if I could respond, I think The issue you're talking about is people who began construction and never completed, or it feels like it's never completed. That's not what we're talking about here.
Doesn't affect
We're
it.
talking about development plans, conditional use permits, tract maps, parcel
the actual
maps, or they
permits-
haven't started construction.
Okay, fine, then I'm fine. Yeah, then I'm fine.
Would you briefly address the noticing? In general, who gets notices on, let's say, a track map or a minor CUP? Who
Outside-
did the notices go to?
Mr. Chair, outside of
And
the.
does it include our body? Would we?
Well, that's interesting.
Because that's one thing I'm wondering. What if we know of some issues that
Sure.
that are generally community issues, and I'm concerned that the noticing might only go to the neighbors, and that maybe a more general issue might get missed.
Mr. Chair, we could certainly look into whether or not the commission receives those waived hearing requests.
Or maybe we
but-
just see that you were planning to do a waived hearing.
Sure.
Which would be adequate as well.
But we typically notice anybody who would have received a notice for the hearing itself. So we would notice neighbors within 300 feet. If it's in the coastal zone, we'd notice occupants within 100 feet, and we would notice interested parties. So special districts, the Montecito Association, other neighborhood groups that might be concerned about.
We might fall under interested parties. I think you could slip us in.
I think we typically notice the planning commission for the, on the
I think you
master
do, but I just
distribution
wasn't
list, yes.
absolutely sure that we were.
I think
in
we
here.
typically do.
Yeah. So maybe that's worth just
Mhm.
if there's an intention to waive the hearing, it might be nice if
Sure.
that was included.
We're
Mr.
not,
Phillips.
we're not changing, thank you, Mr. Chair, we're not changing or talking about changing the 300 feet rule, but does that really work in some of the more rural parts of Montecito? I mean, is that one neighbor that's getting noticed?
Yes, that's true. It's one neighbor getting noticed.
That's not very many.
What?
That's not very many neighbors.
Well, we have addressed this issue recently of our noticing. and-
Because actually, if you really look at it, is like an acre is 200 by 200
Yeah.
feet, so that it really is the neighbors on other sides,
But the impact's bigger, there's people.
Yes,
who-
it is, yeah.
But we're not doing that today, are we? Can we?
Not today.
Not today.
We have 7 minutes left.
Not
Nope.
today.
Can we make some, slip something
Because
in here?
notice is very important to people, and everyone thinks they didn't get it, and didn't get it quick enough, and all that. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, we are going to be coming back to you with some suggestions on noticing, but we're not prepared to
Not
discuss those
today.
issues today.
Yeah, are we still looking at that big sign thing that the city
Well,
uses?
we are, but I'm not sure
Well,
that's where we're going to go. Countywide, it's a very difficult issue.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Farmer X out in New Quiyama is supposed to post a sign on his property. It's a little dicey. And they stay up forever. So you're hearing my concerns. I mean, my personal professional concerns about these signs is.
They just
is
never go
probably-
away, do they?
No,
Yeah.
they really don't.
Why?
I don't know, but I pass one every single day. Actually, I pass several. And they've been up as long as I've lived where I've lived, which is 2 years.
You're kidding.
2 years.
Well, these folks don't know they were allowed to take it down, maybe.
No, I think they're still building their project, and it just remains up, and there's really
right.
nothing that can be done. But county council's going to cut us off because we're talking about something that's not on the
Well,
agenda.
this is not an
So
agenda.
we will be coming back.
You're
We
going to
will
be coming back to us.
Yes.
We're not taking any motion here. You're simply looking at our comments.
Right.
And I think the one from my perspective is just the issue of us having, maybe not noticing of I don't want to get into the noticing of every item, but if we knew you were going to waive the hearing, it might be
Well,
nice to know that.
Mr. Chair, remember the volumes we're talking about. They're not
Yes,
real high.
that's true.
So
That is true.
everyone is not a huge burden.
Good comment. Good comment. Oh, yes, we do need to open this up for public comment. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address us on this item? Not seeing anyone, we'll close the time for public comment. And unless there's anything further from staff, that would conclude our remarks on this item. So that concludes our agenda for today. And if there's no other items to address, then we're adjourned. Thank you.